Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series. My name, as always, is Scott Daly, and I hope everyone is secure and comfortable in their cells, ready to receive this transmission from the beam.
And I'm Matt Freeman, and I just want you to know, telemetry doesn't lie.
Never. It never lies.
Yep.
Never. This week on the show, we learn a bit more about both the prisoners and the prison guards of Al Ghul Siento and the plan to take it down. We're discussing chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Part 2, Blue Heaven. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
I mean, this is so fun, right? Like, we've taken this quite sudden feeling swerve into almost a whole different genre. We find this little Ray Bradbury town nestled into Thunderclap. Completely not what I was expecting at all.
Yeah.
And you know, we come across some characters I would not have expected to meet. I mean, basically it's just a whole section of like delightful surprises, I would say. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, that was the biggest question I had for you going into this episode was how shocking was this to you? Because it is like, I think at any point in this book, I would have said, imagine the prison, quote unquote, where the breakers are being held. And I don't think in a million years you would have said it looks like this place.
No, I think we'll talk about that more in detail later. But yeah, like I either would have imagined it as like a castle dungeon, or I would have imagined it as like a high tech sort of, you know, old ones tech prison with maybe some magical tech sort of built into it for security purposes. But I would never have chosen this option. And that's I'm gonna enjoy talking about why he might have done this way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to say there. And I mean, one of the things that I really enjoyed on this reread is just this idea that the Pimli Prentess chapter is just like, it could just be a short story. Like you can just imagine that chapter as just a short story, a day in the life of a prison warden. And I think it's fascinating on its own. And I think King, we're jumping ahead, but I think King even like prefaces the chapter about that. He's like, all right, we're going to spend some time with this guy. It doesn't really matter, but he's pretty interesting. So let's just spend some time with him. And it makes for just what I thought was just a delightful chapter to read from beginning to end.
Yeah, right. It's almost like he's like writing the Dark Tower and he's like, okay, reader, I had this interesting idea for a character.
Yeah.
I'm just going to run him by you.
Yeah. What do you think, folks? Do you like him? All right. Yeah. Well, let's see what happens. Yeah. So overall, I think, like, again, this is all build up to what is going to be the attack on this prison that Roland and his group are planning. But it's just quite a build up. It's another one of those sections that I'm so glad we get to spend a lot of time on them, because I think there's a lot he's doing to move the pieces into place for this final showdown.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, so let's jump right into it, huh?
Yep, let's do it.
So we begin with chapter 5, lovingly called Steak Titty.
Yep.
I mean, it's your fault. Like, I would have just said Steak Tet like 2 weeks ago, and then you told me it was not Tet.
Steak Titty is how Steak Titty. There you go.
Steak Titty.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
We begin the chapter right where we left off in the last one, with Roland and his Ka-tet puking their guts up and hanging out with 3 strangers who we'll later learn are all breakers. And as we'll learn a little bit later after that, some old friends of ours and of Stephen King's.
Yeah. And it's such a fun way to just move things along, right? Like we leave the last set piece and bam, immediately there's breakers here to start explaining shit and taking them along, right? There's no like confused period of orientation. Nope, the breakers are expecting them. They're already here. We're like already into the plot, right? It's almost like they're jumping into it, and it's like, oh, the conflict is already ongoing. Our Ka-tet is just stepping into it.
Which is how it's been throughout the story, right? I mean, think about every big set piece of this book. It's kind of like Lud, the Kala, our characters kind of stumble into an ongoing story, and they help solve the story and then go on their way. Now, it just so happens that the story they've stumbled into here is like the big one, the one that's about to end the world, and the one that you could argue they're here for. But that still is part of the whole DNA of the series is our characters walk into a situation, realize how bad the situation is, and then lend their guns to the side of goodness.
Yeah. Well, this whole bit, the Steek Titi is a whole different setting, whole different genre, whole different tone from what we just left, right? And so, you know, this feels like Act 1, right? Even though we're on chapter 5 of section whatever, like we're like feels
200 pages in, I think.
Yeah. But this feels like Act 1 of a new thing. Like it feels like we did, you know, a story, and now we're beginning a new story. We're beginning with Act 1 of the Steek Titi break or breakout, whatever it ends up looking like story. And, you know, I don't know if that's going to last the rest of the book, or if we're going to get another story with its own kind of structure to it. I suspect we will, honestly.
Well, that is when I just move on, because I can't say anything.
Very well.
So our characters are all hanging out in a roofed track switching yard. They're surrounded by railways and trains, and I really liked this part right here. The silvery lines Jake had seen were crisscrossing rail lines, perhaps as many as 70 different sets of tracks. On a couple of them, stubby automated engines went back and forth on errands that had been centuries outdated. One was pushing a flat car filled with rusty I-beams. The other began to cry in an automated voice. Willa Kamka'a, please go to Portway A. Kamka'a to Portway 9, if you please. I don't know why I said A. Portway 9, if you please. So we haven't talked about this much recently, but I do love this overall trend in Midworld of this dying world. And again we've seen in this world, the machines here, they just go on working. They just go on, as the book here says, they go on doing their errands, but these are outdated errands, centuries outdated errands. And there's no reason. They're not accomplishing anything anymore. They're just going on and doing the thing that they've always done. And so the world has moved on, but the machines of it, and you could say some of the people, haven't really changed at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a choice, right? Because like the sort of default way to do a dead world, you know, post-apocalyptic world is, you know, it's just dead. The buildings are falling apart. There's rusted out cars. There's vegetation starting to grow over stuff. There's wildlife in the cities. You can sort of just fill in the blanks, right? It's there's a specific thing you kind of expect, but this is almost never going the expected way. This is always this very specific and unique feeling other thing where it's like, okay, it's a dead world, but it's full of robots and machines who are trying to keep doing their jobs despite either the absence of people or the fact that the people are sort of no longer consider that to be, you know, relevant. And, you know, in the places where there aren't people, it makes the absence of the people even more stark in a way. Because it's just like, there's no people. The robots are just doing this for no one and nothing. And the fact that this is, you know, consistently the way he portrays this world, it's very interesting. And I think it's saying something too.
Yeah, I mean, I like it as a metaphor for Roland, right? This man who has just, you know, we should look up like how many times King uses the word plotting in these 7 books, because this man that is just plodding forward on his quest, never stopping. He's been doing it his entire life, and he's just going and going and going. And I mean, I think you'd have to argue that his errand is outdated, and I don't think it is. Like he's got a mission here, an important mission, but it did speak of Roland to me. Just this idea of this thing is just going along on its track, still moving forward. It's been centuries, and he's just still moving forward.
Sure,
that's Roland.
Yeah, and he's a being from a bygone era, just like them. He's out of time, just like they are. He's a relic. Yeah.
So the 3 people that met our quartet lead them onwards, and we learn here that their names are Dinky, Stanley, and Ted. Stanley doesn't speak, and we'll have a lot more to say about him in a moment, but we should pause here just to say generally, just to let you know, Matt, and what probably most of our readers already know, is that these other 2 characters are characters from other Stephen King stories. So Dinky Earnshaw is from a story called Everything's Eventual. It's in the short story collection of the same name. I won't say any more about what his story is, but King does sort of spoil what happens in that story if you're paying attention. And our man,
I missed it. But
okay, good. Because maybe we'll read it one day.
Okay.
So our man Ted Brodigan is from a short story called Low Men in Yellow Coats. This is in the short story collection called Hearts in Atlantis. This is the guy where you just like randomly, I think the first time the word breaker was said, you just randomly were like, oh, is Anthony Hopkins a breaker then? And like everyone listening to the podcast just went, what the fuck? I guess you've seen Hearts in Atlantis, Matt, is where that came from.
I had seen Hearts in Atlantis, the film adaptation. Literally the only thing I remember about the movie was that Anthony Hopkins had The Shining and that he was hiding from low men. And I can hear Anthony Hopkins's distinctive voice in my head saying low men, and like just and kind of always thinking like what a great phrase that was, like the connotations of like, oh, that's so ominous, you know. And that's like almost everything I remember about the movie. And so that's why the connection leapt to mind so easily, is that like we've had this idea of low men, and we had this idea of psychics being a thing that the low men were hunting. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, the whole thing of that movie was he was a psychic the low men were hunting. So
I just love how your random ass Stephen King knowledge just continues to apply perfectly at random moments. I've
read the small handful of things that happen to be hyper relevant. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like, in no way were you guessing that Ted Brodigan was going to become a character in the story. But there he is. Here he is now. So hooray.
And I get to imagine him as Anthony Hopkins. So.
Yeah, there you go. And I mean, we learn a little bit later in the Pimli chapter that the word low men was actually coined by Ted himself. And then it's just become the accepted name across the prison for these people now, for the Cantoi, which I think is funny. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but I think it also kind of shows the ways in which Ted is much more in charge of the goings on of the prison than the prison guards think. Like, it's a good little hint towards, like, there's this recurring beat in that chapter of these two characters terrified and worried and uncertain about what's going to happen because they're near the end. And Ted is just like calmly just controlling things without their knowledge.
Yeah, that's true. That's really fun.
So, I mean, I obviously it's cool that like suddenly we have this we're inundated with Stephen King characters. We've got Dinky, we've got Ted. We're going to talk about Ka-shume in a few minutes, but as another character from a previous Stephen King book, it just happens to be one that was also in this series. So it's very interesting that he's kind of made the breakers as like, the breakers are protagonists from my other stories, or at least characters from my other stories. It makes them seem automatically important. It makes the choice to do it that way, the choice to make this character Ted instead of just a random person, makes him feel more important and more significant in these moments.
That's true. Yeah, good point.
So the three tell the Katet that they're leading them to a distant mountain called Can Steak Titty, or as Steak Titty, as you say, whatever. The translation of that is the little needle, because it's like it's a mountain needle thing.
Sure, I like we're really using this, this titty word, which just means little. It's like in everything, right? Isn't that interesting? Like I feel like most, maybe almost all of the midworld speak terms we've heard recently have been something titty.
Yeah, and there's a lot of can as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of repetition of these words, and I mean, you could make the dualistic argument that Stephen King just thought of it and he liked it, and so he started putting it in everything. Sure, but also it feels like it helps maybe feel like you've moved on to a different part of the world again. Like, we got into the Kala and we had all this Kala speak, and that was totally new, and we've moved beyond that now. We're in Thunderclap, and suddenly we have these new words, and it feels like a different area because of that.
Yeah, it's the TD part of the story, or the titty part of the story, if you will, if you must.
Thank you for doing that for me. I appreciate that. So to get to the little needle, they teleport.
It's cool.
Stanley, who is absolutely not Ka-shume, absolutely not, takes them all into a closet in the rail yard and just teleports them up there. So it's teleportation.
That's pretty useful. That's pretty useful power. They could probably use this on their journey to the Dark Tower.
Yeah, just teleport there. This is going to be the new Lord of the Rings Eagles. Why didn't Ka-shume just teleport him to the Dark Tower?
Yeah.
Speaking of not Shimi, I do quite enjoy the way King kind of builds to this reveal. Like we meet Stanley and he's this quiet person that doesn't say much, but we have this part right here. He suspected they'd all played a part in keeping the portal open, but it was the one called Stanley who'd created it in the first place. Now he looked pale and tired, nearly used up. Once he staggered on his feet and Dink, a very unfortunate nickname in Jake's humble opinion, grabbed his arm and steadied him. Stanley seemed not to notice. He was looking at Roland with awe. Not just awe, Jake thought, and not exactly fear either. Something else. What? So, like, in retrospect, it becomes very obvious what King is doing here, but you're just kind of thrown for a loop the first time you're reading through this. At least I was the first time. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see it coming, didn't know what to make of it, just kind of figured we'll figure this out shortly, probably, which we did. I mean, I kind of, like, part of me feels like I should have been able to figure out that this was Shimi. Like, I don't think there were clues here, but I don't know. I think I may have made some gestures at the idea that maybe Shimi was psychic back in that book, because, you know, we talked about how King tends to make his mentally disabled characters also be psychic, and I think I'm pretty sure I did say that, but I don't know if that went anywhere.
It didn't really back then. I mean, he was an interesting character, and I loved Shimi so much, but and you felt like he knew things and understood things, and like was like something special was going on with Shimi for sure. But at the time, it could also have been like 1,000 other things, right? It could be the power of the quartet, right? The power of Kef as he kind of joined their quartet. Like it was really hard to get an exact read on it.
I also felt like vaguely like something more is in store with Shimi. Like the story, I feel like there was a way in which the story intentionally left us with this feeling of like, but that wasn't the last we saw of Shimi, and then it just kind of didn't ever do anything else with that. And I think I just figured like, okay, well, you know, that whatever, he was a character from that part of the story and he went on and lived his life. But no, like I think literally that was the story telling us that he would be back. So
yeah. No, I think that's fair. It's interesting because he did a lot of stuff with Roland and Cuthbert and Elaine after they left Hambury, and we were told like the Cliff Notes versions of what happened there. But when we meet Shimi here, he's very much still caught up on those exact things and not the things that happened after it. I'm jumping ahead again, but I think so was Roland in a way, right? So
yeah.
So now that they're up on the mountain, the quartet get their first really good view of the Devar toy. And that view is helped along by a giant beam of sunlight. Susanna was amused as well as amazed. What Ted was pointing out reminded her of a Cecil B. DeMille biblical epic, The Ten Commandments, especially the part where the Red Sea opened by Moses had looked suspiciously like Jell-O, and the voice of God coming from the burning bush sounded quite a bit like Charles Lofton. Still, it was amazing. In a cheesy Hollywood special effects way, that was. What they saw was a single fat and gorgeous bolt of sunlight slanting down from a hole in the sagging clouds. It cut through the strangely dark air like a searchlight beam and lit the compound that might have been 6 miles from Thunderclap Staten. And about 6 miles was really all you could say, because there was no more north or south in this world, at least not that you could count on. Now there was only the path of the beam.
I love that. First of all, I love just the image, the visual image of this bolt of kind of unnatural sunlight cutting down through the thick, murky Mordor air. And also, you know, I feel like I don't think we ever formally revisited this idea about the cardinal directions, but I feel like more recently there's been more evidence for this idea that west basically means away from the tower and east basically means toward the tower. Sure. And north and south are just kind of whatever. I can't put my finger on what it was exactly, but like I feel like things have happened recently that kind of reinforce that image.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the general idea that the only two directions that matter are exactly what you said: closer to the tower and further away from the tower, and that's nothing else matters in this context besides those two directions. Now, technically, it's still southeast, so there's still some south going on there, but it doesn't even really matter anymore. It's just to the tower, away from the tower.
Yeah, it's like if you're going almost east but right of the east heading, then you're going southeast. There you go.
Yeah.
It's, sure, whatever.
Yeah, I love the image of this place too. I love that like King takes the time to show us that like this should look goofy. Like you should imagine this looking kind of goofy. It's unnatural. It's not like it's daytime. It's this unnaturally supported daytime. And I think that helps build this image of what the Devar toy is, because it's this, as Susanna will start to talk about here in a minute, it reminds her of Greentown, the Ray Bradbury idealized village in which I think 3 of his books took place. I think Something Wicked This Way Comes is the one that everyone knows, but I think 3 of his novels took place in this like idealized American perfect town. And it's bullshit, right? Like it's all fake and a facade. And it's fascinating that like the rest of this week is us going to be talking about the Devar toy or Al Gulciento or whatever you want to call it. Like just what this place is and what it is to different people that are there. And it's just this fascinating choice to start our image of this thing as this fake sunlight on a fake, like idealized town.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's perfect. What were your like first impressions of the big prison the first time you saw it here?
I mean, yes, like I said earlier, very surprised and intrigued also. And I think this connection that Susanna makes to Greentown really kind of got me thinking because so I've never actually read any of the Greentown books, but I've read a bunch of Ray Bradbury's short story collections when I was younger. And it seems extremely relevant that we're bringing in Bradbury here, actually, because like,
sure.
It really is a very specifically Bradbury setting to have this, little scenic village. Now, the thing about Bradbury is most of the short story collections I read were like the Martian Chronicles and stuff like that.
Yep.
And in that setting, then you will actually have a scenic little village, except it's actually populated by aliens, or there's like robots that are going to kill you or something. Or there's just like hallucinations caused by ancient machinery wasn't like an actual plot line, I think. So like this is super Bradbury-esque, right? It's a scenic village, scenic old-timey village surrounded by broken down robots, signifying the loss of humanity that accompanies reliance on technology. And, I mean, Bradbury fucking hated technology, and that was kind of his whole thing. So I'm actually feel kind of stupid for not having made like any kind of Bradbury midworld connection earlier than this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was definitely there. What I love about Stephen King is that if you don't make it, eventually he will just say, "Here you are," and make it explicit for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, now that he's made it explicit, I'm sort of seeing it everywhere. Like you could even go back even to, I always forget the name, the Wise Old Elves village, and kind of there was a sort of Bradbury-esque feeling to it of just like this delightfully beautiful, sort of worship of the doing things with your hands and being honest and simple, and that all feels very Bradbury to me also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, the contradiction of this place is so central to what it is and what it means. And I'm really excited about diving into that with you.
Yeah. Me too.
There's so much going on here. And none the least of it is its name, right? Because we learn here that while the prisoners call it Devar Toy, which means the big prison, the low men and the other guards call the prison Al Gulciento, which is a phrase we've heard before, of course. We heard good old Finley Otego say it back in Wolves of the Calla, but also, I don't know if you remember this, Matt, way back in The Gunslinger, the Taheen that Roland saw wandering around in the desert was talking about Al Gulciento, only sometimes he calls it Blue Haven or Heaven. I can't make out which. So this is Brown talking to Roland about the Birdman way back in The Gunslinger.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I mean that's the first Taheen we ever heard of, and he was actually associated with this place.
Yeah. This is, I mean, we're far enough along in the book now where I can start telling you the things in the Gunslinger that were added after the fact. That is one of them that was not in the original. This Taheen talking about Algol Siento was not in the original version of the Gunslinger. It was in the edited version. He added that back in. But I mean, from our perspective of reading the story in present day, where that's just in the book, like it does have this poetic sense of coming around on itself again, right? And you know, in this moment, they say the low men call it Algol Siento, and Roland translates immediately, and he says blue heaven, and they're like, excellent translation, Roland. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, did he know what the words meant? Was he translating it, or was he just remembering that it had been called that before from earlier in his journey? And there's no definitive answer there, but it is interesting to think about.
Yeah, for sure. He doesn't let us know, right? And maybe he remembers it, but doesn't even remember where he remembers it from. Who knows?
Yeah.
Because I sure didn't like, honestly, I did not remember that this was a word that came up in the Gunslinger, although I do remember it coming up in Wolves. Like I think I remember it from there because we talked about how Algol sounds like a Tolkien word.
Yeah.
But and then Siento is sort of a Spanish sounding word that may not actually be Spanish. I don't remember.
It is. So what we talked about was that Algol Siento in Spanish doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
And people rightfully pointed out that if you mix languages together, you can derive a meaning of these words. That meaning is not blue heaven, by the way.
Okay.
there's none of that. But it is interesting, right? Because this is what I wanted to talk about here. We have one side calling this place blue heaven, and the other side calling it the prison. And that is the perfect way of describing the dichotomy, the difference, the central disconnect between the different people that reside at this place. And it's just a really wonderful way of kind of setting that up, because we learn here that the breakers get all the stuff, they get all the sex they want, like it's simulated sex, but hey, it's good. They get nice wine, nice food, they get all the creature comforts, and all they have to do in return is, you know, help bring about the end of all existence and stuff.
Yeah, that's such a fascinating and surprising and just interesting sci-fi concept that we've kind of stumbled into in this story. Like again, it's not just a prison. Like they're not locked into rooms, and they're not forced to wear, you know, high-tech helmets that coerce their powers into. No, they're all working to bring about the end of the world, and it's because they're so well taken care of that none of them can be arsed to rebel, I guess.
Yeah, like just for a complete hypothetical, it would just be really ridiculous and wrong-headed for like an adaptation of this story to just do that exact thing, to just make them prisoners in helmets. Just, you know, as a complete hypothetical that won't come up again at all.
Yes, Scott, it would be really disappointing. And
it would be so disappointing.
And I can see how that would make people really angry if that happened.
Anyway, I mean, this is the fascinating thing about this, because you're absolutely right. This is Stephen King once again not wanting to take the easy way out with any of his characters, any of his descriptions. People are complicated, and all the people that live in this prison are complicated on both sides of it, because we have this wonderful talk here where Dinky is trying to explain why the breakers would do this. And he says, so you don't know about Jim Jones and the People's Temple. It's easier to explain if you know about that. Almost 1,000 people committed suicide at this religious compound a Jesus guy from San Francisco set up in Guyana. They drank poisoned Kool-Aid out of a tub while he watched them from a porch of his house and used a bullhorn to tell them stories about his mother. Susanna was staring at him with horrified disbelief, Ted with poorly disguised impatience. Yet he must have thought something about this was important, because he held silence. Almost 1,000, Dinky reiterated, because they were confused and lonely and thought Jim Jones was their friend, because, dig it, they had nothing to go back to. And it's like that here. If the breakers united, they could make a mental hammer that'd knock Prentess and the Weasel and all the Taheen and their Cantoi all the way into the next galaxy. Instead, there's no one but me, Stanley, and everyone's favorite super breaker, the totally eventual Mr. Theodore Brodigan of Milford, Connecticut, Harvard class of 20, Drama Society, Debate Club, editor of the Crimson, and of course, Phi Beta Crapper. The end of that, it's just vintage King, and I love it. But it's so hard to really get into this without like jumping way ahead and diving into Pimli Prentess, and I don't want to do that quite yet. But as we talked about, I just find King's choices here so fascinating. As you said, he could have made Devartoy look like a prison. Prisoners chained up and force-fed twin brains and just forced to use their beaten and forced to use their powers to bring down the beam, but he didn't. These people are just lost, confused, scared rejects of society. Many of them are here because their powers tend to ostracize them. Like we're mentioned a person with a very large, like a huge brain, huge cranial, like that is just completely ostracized. People that had no friends, people that were on the outskirts of society. And the Crimson King and his ilk have kind of swooped them up and given them a place to belong, given them a purpose. And so many of them, most of them, in fact, continue to do this job. And it's a fascinating choice to do that. And to make the ultimate villain of this prison, not a horrible, like outright monster like you might expect to see, like the evil warden, but a person that they relate to Jim Jones, a charismatic person that can convince you to kill yourself for just because you're so desperate to have a place to belong.
This is so great. And I feel like this is so connected to what King's been doing with this really increasingly nuanced exploration of evil. Because it's none of the boring expected kinds of evil. It's I think when we get to the prison warden's POV, we're going to hit this point even harder. This idea that people will do whatever gives them a sense of purpose and meaning, even if that thing is monstrous, if there's no other way for them to get it. That really describes that character, and he's the guy who's in charge. But in a certain sense, all of the breakers are in a sense complicit because, they're participating, they're going along with it. They're not being forced. Ted, I get it. I get really confused about how Ted experiences time, since he's incredibly old, actually. And like, how long does he think he's been here, or subjectively, how long has he been here, I guess? Or is he immortal or something? It doesn't matter really. It's just, he's clearly been sort of facilitating this for a long time. And like, what story has he been telling himself,
Yeah.
Like,
what shocked him out of it? Because like, we have these three characters that are like, we're basically told are the only three that are actively working against the guards here. And what made that happen to them three? We can kind of guess with Shimi because it's Shimi, but the others we don't really know yet.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And I mean, you're right that the things are so timey-wimey here. We get told explicitly in the next chapter that like time just doesn't pass normally here. That like Pimli's been here for 25 years, but he doesn't seem 50. Like he was 25 when he came, so he should be 50, but he's not 50. He's whatever, and it's just this weird kind of stuck in time. And I think the whole Ray Bradbury-esque nature of it really helps reinforce that this is just this removed from time existence. Like it's a utopia in some fucked up form of that, right? Like all the food you want, all the drink you want, all the sex you want, and all you got to do is just chill in the study for a couple hours a day and pretend to read a book.
And the thing that, again, we're going to hit this more in a bit, like they're working to destroy the multiverse. They're working to, I think not just kill, but probably like throw into some sort of torturous hell existence countless trillions of lives, maybe an unlimited number of lives. And why? Because because it's comfortable, basically. Because it's not evident what else they could be doing,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it goes back to, I think you've correctly kind of connected this back to our quartet, because we had this whole conversation last week or the week before where they're talking about, I really wish we could take out everyone, everyone who's doing something because they mean well, right? And how well-meaning can be evil. And I'm sure, like, I mean, we'll see with Pimli, he certainly thinks he means well. He has no delusion about what he's doing, but the why of it and the result. Like, it's so fascinating. And King didn't have to do any of this. Like, he could have just made this guy an asshole. He could have just made these people actual prisoners, like just literal prisoners. And he doesn't want to do that. He wants to explore the concept. Like, I feel like the central question in so much of his work is what makes a person do this thing? What makes a person kill someone? What makes a person lie? What makes a person cheat? What makes a person do some of the most despicable things that humanity is capable of doing? How does a person do that? And I want to dive into his mind and see his mind as the mind of a human being, not the mind of a monster.
Yeah. So I think this is a great place for this idea that's been bouncing around my head.
Sure.
I don't think I've articulated that. So King has sort of told us through the character of Stephen King that Roland Deschain is a character who sort of popped into his head and then refused to leave because he's so strange in a way. Like, he's kind of an enigma. He's this guy who would let a kid die for his goals. But you can't bring yourself to hate him for that.
Yeah.
And that's a fascinating concept, right? And I feel like the whole of the Dark Tower is like King asking us, and maybe even for his own sake, exploring this idea of like, what do we really feel about this guy, and what does this really say about us, and what of ourselves is in Roland here? Because he's a guy who, he has a story that he tells himself about how he's doing the most important thing in the world, and that leads him to do somewhat monstrous things at different points in time.
Sure.
And even now, we still kind of believe that he could probably make similar choices. I don't think he would kill. I don't think he would sacrifice Jake specifically, but I think that he would sacrifice pretty much anybody else at this point, which is, it just speaks to how in certain ways, like, there's been some character growth, but in some ways there's been none.
Yeah.
And anyway, the point of all this is to say, I think that stuff like the Breakers and the way, and also the Warden in his own way, like, these are reflections on who Roland is, and how it is that we can get our heads around Roland.
Yeah,
this enigmatic character who, we and King are still kind of struggling to understand all these books in.
Yeah, I love that. And the way a storyteller, if a storyteller has a character that they don't quite understand, or that they want to explore and understand, the way that they do that is by throwing that character up against antagonists who are equally enigmatic, who are equally complicated. And we kind of poke and prod them. And if we go back to the very old school kid playing imagination, you have their two action figures and you're just bumping them up against that, you're fighting them, right? And you're trying to figure out how you feel about that. Like, we have a person like Pimli and we have a person like Roland, and there are ways in which they're similar and there are ways in which they're very different. And what does that say about our character when he comes up against a person like that? And how this conflict is resolved, I think, is an important part of that, of what King is saying and what he's exploring. And I love that. I love that. I think that's a great pull. And I think, one of the things that I love most about it is, I don't know if Stephen King, at least at this point in this novel, is confident of what his answer is yet. I think it's just like, when he's writing this book, he probably knows how it's going to end, right? Like, he knows what his ending is going to be. But even until the last moment, I think you're still exploring who your characters are. No, that's a great pull. I love that.
I think something that works into this is that even in this week's reading, we have this moment of Jake clearly having not forgiven him for dropping him.
Yeah.
Still, right. And he shouldn't forgive him. It would feel like a weird kind of fake. It wouldn't feel right if he did.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's like, speaking the way our antagonists are reflections of Roland, I think our protagonists, Roland's quartet, are reflections of King attempting to understand him as well. Because Jake is a character that, for all intents and purposes, should hate him and should never forgive him for the thing that he does to him. But he loves him. And that's us, right? That's us. Eddie Dean is a person who has worked long and hard to escape from his addiction. and he is still ride or die with a man who is hopelessly addicted to the tower. How does that work out? Why? Susanna is a little bit more complicated, as she is in every other situation. But I do think like there is this, the initial meeting of Susanna before she was even Susanna was this person who both was terrified of Roland and like deeply enamored by him. And that those two personalities were sort of combined into one that was Susanna. And there's this ongoing dichotomy of how she feels towards him. And all these people reflect our and Stephen King's feel and search for who Roland is. I love that.
I'm really glad you reminded me of how Susanna first, Odetta was just sort of like wary and confused by him, and Detta just hated him and feared him. That was great. That's a great. That's really cool. It's really cool. I love that.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. So we have to talk about, like, we talked about Bobby Garfield at the very end of last week's chapter. Bobby Garfield is a character from Low Men in Yellow Coats. He lived, I think, below Ted. I can't remember. It's been too long since I read that. But so he says here, "You really could be my younger friend's twin. Did you know that, son?" "No, but it doesn't surprise me," Jake said. "It's the way things work over here. Somehow everything fits."
Yeah, meaning that the kid in Hearts in Atlantis should have been played by River Phoenix as well.
Sure. But I mean, like, this has been a recurring theme, right? Like, we've been having this idea. It's not even a theme, really. It's more of a motif, but just like of twins. Twins have been a thing since book 5, really. And you could argue earlier, but we've had this nebulous concept of duality and of twins, but we've also had like direct people, like the head of the Manny looking, a Henchek looking exactly like the priest of the God Bomb, right? Like that these people seem to be twins. Like this. So there's this concept that like in different levels of the tower, there seem to be doubles or near, not exactly, but close to near double twins of people.
Absolutely. It's been happening throughout, and I don't know if I have anything more to add about that as like what is it doing, but yeah, for sure it's I don't know if there's what if any would be the meaning of why Jake looks like the kid, other than, you know, everything rhymes.
Yeah Maybe we'll get to circle back around to that one day.
Cool.
So we also learn that the children of Roderick are here as well, and they're kind of groundskeepers. Roland asks them to bring him one tomorrow, but they tell him the danger of involving one of them in their plans because these guys can't keep their mouths shut. So Roland is just like, yeah, don't worry. Like, if my hunch doesn't plan out, I'll just kill him. And Ted is like, oh yeah, just fucking right, you know, no big deal, just fucking kill him. It's a fascinating exchange that I think goes into exactly what you were talking about. Is this core of Roland is this person that you're like, yikes, bud.
Yeah, the whole little interlude here is so fucking disturbing because Roland basically admits to seeing the children of Roderick as like subhuman somehow. It's not cool. What you just talking about the quartet there and how we first met them reminded me how for a little bit of time we thought that Jack Mort was gonna be one of his 3, right? Like that was that was how King set up that book. There's 3 doorways. The third doorway is Jack Mort, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you think you're like, and Roland, you and Roland are like, oh my God, like we're gonna have to use this guy, this piece of shit. Like, and the reason I'm saying it is like that guy reflects like the worst side of Roland, which is what we're seeing here. Like this is the Jack Mort side of Roland, right?
Sure.
The side that he's sort of rejected, but he still behaves this way. I mean, I don't know. The Jack Mort thing I hadn't thought of it in a while, and it seemed like it fit here. So
no, I like that. And we see him kind of just fall back into when Ted kind of calls him on it. We just see him fall back into his utilitarian logic, right? Which is like, what is one rod against the entirety of existence, right? Like the stakes of our fight right now is the existence of everything.
Mm.
So what is this one person if it ensures the success of that? And while undoubtedly true, the problem with that is when you stake everything you do against existence, it's always going to win. And therefore you can justify anything and everything. And that is indeed what Roland has done time and time again. That's how he justified letting Jake die. That's how he, in his mind, kind of knows that he might justify it again. He's still capable of doing it again. It's just this cold, hard utilitarian nature that makes a man monstrous. And that's, I mean, to jump ahead once again, we're about to get to Pimli, but that's kind of what he's doing too. He's doing it differently though. It gets into a bunch of religious talk that we're going to get to talk religion again, because Stephen King loves religious characters. But it's just fascinating the ways in which characters justify things, and that's so much of what this book is. And the series is. For
a second, I was going to say the only difference is that Roland is actually right in that him getting to the tower will save the universe, and then I was like, wait a minute, we were just told recently that that's not even true. His whatever he does at the tower will only prolong the existence of the universe, according to Mia, we should say. But like, if that's true, then I mean, then like again, we're still not even sure if that's true, which hints that he might even know that that's true and just not care. I don't know. It's so interesting. I mean, I think you're right though, that it forces it's a wonderful scathing critique of utilitarianism, as if I didn't need any more of those.
It feels like every book we do a show on at some point is critiquing utilitarianism.
It does feel like that.
I'm trying to remember if there's a critique of utilitarian in Buffy. Yep. Okay, we got to do a show on Buffy.
Okay, all right.
All right, so the three inform the quartet of a giant weapons cache that they have hanging out in one of the lower caves. And then as we approach the end of the chapter, it comes time for Roland to confront Stanley, who is, of course, Shimi. Shimi is ashamed. And we learn here basically that the look that Shimi was giving Roland was not fear. It was shame. There was some shame here. And Shimi is still kind of completely ruled by his failure to help prevent the death of Susan. But Roland here, and this is, once again, we have the contradiction of Roland, Matt. We have a few paragraphs before he said, who the fuck cares about these children of Roderick when the universe is at stake? And then here he looks at Shimi and says, I absolve you. This was not your fault. This was Rhea of the Coos, and it was me. Out of anyone involved in this thing, in the death of Susan, you are the least responsible for this. And so he takes the time to absolve this poor man who has been ruled by this thing for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And it works. Like, Shimi is so like he takes the time to do this, and he doesn't need to do this. Does this help them on their quest? Maybe, but it was the right thing to do, and he does it. And that's why you're exactly right that you can't hate Roland. You just can't.
Yeah, this is his humanity. We just completely, I was gonna say seesawed, more like whiplash between like, yeah, don't worry, I'll just kill them if they can't help me, and this heartfelt moment of love and regret and sweetness from this guy, and it's like, yeah. I
mean, look at this. I'm gonna read this, Matt, because it's so good. Shimi put his arms around Roland's neck and hugged him tight. Roland smiled and stroked his curly hair with his disfigured right hand. A loud, honking sob escaped Shimi's throat. Susanna could see the tears in the corners of the gunslinger's eyes. I, Roland said, speaking in a voice almost too low to hear, I always knew you were special. Bert and Elaine did too. And here we find each other, well met further down the path. We're well met, Shimi, son of Stanley. So we are. It's fucking beautiful.
Yeah. I love it.
Roland's crying too. Yeah. Roland's crying.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
this is like, I think like Shimi is back, and I asked you why, and I don't think you have a definitive answer for me here.
I don't know. I don't have any. I mean, this is a story where King has routinely brought back characters who we met before, and I'm at this point, it's almost a meme that I'll be like, are we going to see this character again? I don't know. Yes, no, like so this is a character who he's bringing back, and that's cool, and it's a thing that he's done a lot. I don't know if there's a specific thing that Shimi knows or can do, or what exactly. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that remains to be seen. I mean, all we know in this early moment of Shimi's back in the story is he does exactly what we were talking about, which is remind us of Roland's core humanity, and I think it's important for King to do that. Like, I think he's known from the beginning, and I think the character of Stephen King even states it in this last book, that Roland is hard, and he's a hard character because you want to hate him and you can't. And so the reason why the Stephen King character of the story abandoned the gunslinger, never finished writing that story, and never moved on to the next ones, was because he couldn't quite know, he didn't know what to do with him next, because it's hard to have a character who does this central horrible act, but you recognize that the rules of storytelling mean that if you're going to follow this guy through your big epic, you need to care about him and you need to relate to him on some level. And so he's constantly having to to counter every act that makes you go, ugh, Roland, with an act that goes, oh, Roland. And that's difficult to do. And it's difficult to kind of balance that thing constantly. And I think that in this moment, Shimi's role is to do exactly that here. Well,
yes, and it's especially difficult to do without it eventually coming off as disingenuous.
Sure.
Like there's a lesser writer could have attempted this, and you end up just thinking like, oh, Roland, yeah, here's Roland, being all teary eyed again. Well, what a manipulative son of a bitch, right? But no, and there's enough humanity for you to relate to. That's the thing, is we all do things we regret, and we've all done things that are bad at some point, and so you can't just say I condemn you, because okay, well, does that mean you condemn every person who does a bad thing that they now regret doing?
Yes,
because okay, well, that was easy. Yeah, that's I think that's where King kind of gets you, is it's the difference is that he regrets these things that he does.
Yeah, sure.
I guess. Yeah.
I mean, it's a small difference, but an important one.
Yeah,
for sure. All right, let's move on to chapter 6, The Master of Blue Heaven. Matt, we've been gesturing towards it for the last hour, and we're finally here. This is absolutely one of my favorite chapters of this book so far on this reread. Pimli Prentess is such a wonderful classic Stephen King character here. This disgusting, certainly often despicable person who just has this complete inability to see himself that way at all.
Yeah.
He's so perfect. I love him.
Yeah, me too.
So we meet Pimli Prentess standing in front of a mirror, staring at a sore on his face that's ready to blow. We learn that Pimli is a human from the New Jersey level of the tower, and he is the warden, the master of Alguciento. And our old friend Finley Otego, the weasel, walks in and they have a palaver together. Finley was checking out the disturbance made by the quartet and later Mordred going through the portal, and he's here to give his report. So it's kind of our setup for this chapter.
Yeah. So I love how they're introduced as so fucking gross.
Yeah.
But you sort of like them. But you still want them to die, and you realize they suck, but they're just such a pair of goofballs.
Yeah.
I'll talk about kind of the back and forth of this as we go through it.
Sure. But first, speaking of disgusting, here we go. The top of the pimple bulged, trembled, burst. A glut of bloody pus leapt from the side of the infection, splattered onto the mirror, and began to drool down its slightly concave surface. Pimli Prentess wiped it off with the tip of a finger, turned to flick it into the jakes, then offered it to Finley instead. The Taheen shook his head, then made the sort of exasperated noise any veteran dieter would have recognized and guided the master's finger into his mouth. He sucked the pus off and then released the finger with an audible pop. So you know the old like save the cat screenwriting trick, Matt, where like you have your protagonist do something like unquestionably good to immediately endear them to the audience. You know that trick? This is like the exact opposite strategy. This is the eat the pimple strategy of screenwriting, where you just
Yeah. Stephen King's imagination truly does not have guardrails. And it's not that this is like the most heinous thing you've ever seen. It's just so gross in a way that I just would not go. I would not go here. I would not take it here.
Yeah. And it's the fascinating thing about this to me, and I think this is something that we've seen time and time again with King. Like, it's not just the act of eating pimple pus.
Mm-hmm.
It's the words and the manner in which he describes it, right? Like, the sort of exasperated noise any veteran dieter would have recognized. Like, it's not just that he ate this. He's like, oh no, I shouldn't, but okay. It just makes it like it's just this little, it's half a part of the sentence that turns this from disgusting to horrifyingly disgusting. And I don't know how he does that. He just always finds the perfect words to just elevate what is a gross situation on its own and make it into something more. And you know, going back to the adapting of Stephen King, and we have our bonus Patreon podcast where we're kind of slowly going through Stephen King adaptations. And I think that is one of the things that the worst of the King adaptations lose, is they just describe the situation, but they don't do it in what is the visual equivalent of then he made a sort of exasperated noise any veteran dieter would have recognized, right? Like I think the best Stephen King adapters are paying attention to that sentence and not just what's going on in the scene. Yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, because it's never just straight disgusting. It's disgusting with character woven in, right? And that's what that is. Yeah.
Yep. It's just a little moment that he's just like us, right? Like we've all, well, not you, because you're this skinny person, but us not skinny people have all like immediately recognized that instinct,
the sound. Yeah. I mean, I love getting the chance to talk about word choice in here, like a glut of bloody pus. Glut. The word glut, that's not a word I would have reached for, but it works great. Splattered onto the mirror, began to drool down. Drool down. Not slide down, drip down, drool down. Sounds great. Has a great kind of assonance with bloody drool. Glut. It just like makes you like gag, just like saying it. It's so good. Perfect.
Yeah, I hope none of y'all listening out there are eating right now. Just imagine that food you just put into your mouth. Bloody pus.
Yeah, there's a reasonably good chance that they are, Scott.
Sorry I ruined your lunch. So speaking of pimples, we do learn here that the reason Pimli is covered in these gross sores is because things are not going well in this part of the world. It was the environment, of course, death baking out of the very rocks and earth that surrounded them. If you wanted to see things at the worst, you only had to look at the Rods, who were no better than slow mutants these days. Of course, they wandered far to the... Was it still the southeast? They wandered far in the direction where a faint red glow could be seen at night, in any case. And everyone said things were much worse in that direction. Pimli didn't know for sure if that was true, but he suspected it was. They didn't call the lands beyond Fedek the Discordia because they were vacation spots.
It's cool. Is that the first time that we've heard of like that area being called the Discordia?
Yes and no. I mean, Mia called it that before. Like the Discordia is a state of being, and also the lands beyond Thundercloud.
Okay. Yeah, I thought the Discordia was like the primordial chaos, but it's also that area.
Yeah.
So which is interesting because it's like, is that literally true? Like, does it literally descend into a kind of chaos once you're that close? I assume we'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of like a truism of the book from the beginning is that the closer our characters get to the tower, like the worse things get. Like everything, the tower is central to everything, so the destruction spread out from its center. And so yeah, as we get closer, this is going to get worse, and we're in a point now where it's so bad that there's radiation and rot and death everywhere.
Yeah.
I also want to point out here that, like, right after Roland basically dehumanizes the children of Roderick, Pimli Prentess, the monstrous prison guard, does the same thing. Like, who are no better than slow mutants these days? And we all know slow mutants don't need to be considered people.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? I man, the whole children of Roderick thing, I feel like we're building towards something there, because we've basically met like one, and then we've seen a bunch of them, but we don't really get like what their deal is, where they're from.
Sure.
You know, the whole why and how and so forth.
Yeah. So Finley and Pimli, I love these names so much. I love the teen names. Talk about their general state of nervousness, how they both recognize that they are almost near the end, and it's making them question everything but their duty, of course, because we learn here that, yes, they both are fully aware of the scope of what they're doing here, trying to end existence. But this is like the first time the chapter kind of sets what is going to be the tone for the rest of it, that these two characters, the leadership cast of this prison, are both like paranoid and almost like constantly trying to convince each other that they're being paranoid, and nothing like, I love the back and forth here, because it's like, you if you're not paying close enough attention, you almost lose track of which one's being overly paranoid where, because like they both have moments when they're just like, I don't know, and then the person's like, no, that's fine, and then it switches back.
Yeah, I love it.
So Pimli decides to go with Finley on his rounds, but first he has to go pray to God. Wait, what? And here we go. Here's where we begin to complicate this character. And while he's on his knees before the closed toilet seat, this man, who will shortly be asking his God to forgive him for working to end creation, and with absolutely no sense of irony, we might as well look at him a bit more closely. We won't take long, for Pimli Prentess isn't central to our tale of Roland and his quartet. Still, he's a fascinating man, full of folds and contradictions and dead ends. He's an alcoholic who believes deeply in a personal God, a man of compassion who is now on the verge of toppling the tower and sending the trillions of worlds that spin on its axis flying into the darkness in a trillion different directions. He would quickly put Dinky Earnshaw and Stanley Ruiz to death if he knew what they'd been up to, and he spends most every Mother's Day in tears, for he loved his own ma dearly and misses her bitterly. When it comes to the apocalypse, here's the perfect guy for the job, one who knows how to get knee-bound and can speak to the Lord God of hosts like an old friend. He understood that he's also in that egg, and that he would cease to exist as flesh when he broke it. But surely, if there was a heaven and a God in it, then both superseded the power of the tower. It was to that heaven he would go, and before that throne he would kneel to ask forgiveness for his sins, and he would be welcome in with a hearty, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." His ma would be there, and she would hug him, and they would enter the fellowship of Jesus together. That day would come, Pimli was quite sure, and probably before Reap Moon rolled around again.
Of that last line where it's like, he has this sort of general, religious story he's telling himself, and then it's like, oh yeah, and it'll happen real soon too.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, like Saturday.
Yeah.
Man, so once again we have a religious character in our story, and once again, unlike Father Callahan, but we have a religious character whose religion is being used to justify horrible acts. And it's just, once again, it's so fascinating. Like, this is I feel like we've already talked Pimli to death, and we've just started this chapter, but he's just so wonderful in that, like, this certainty that he has, this certainty that, like, surely if there was a heaven and a God in it, then both superseded the power of the tower. So he's kind of worked the existence of this nexus of everything into his already understood religious hierarchy. And he said, well, God is God, and therefore God must be above the tower, which is a question that our characters have asked multiple times throughout the story, right? It's like, is there, like, we know God now, right? We know this concept of God. Is that greater than the tower? Is it part of the tower? Like, what is above the tower? This, I think the Man in Black has asked this, and the Man in Black actually last week said that's what he wanted. He would get to the tower, he would climb it, and then he would become the god of all, the ruler of everything, the most powerful person in the universe. But nobody knows. Nobody really knows. And everyone's operating as if they do know. And so Pimli has told himself a story that he's doing this thing, but the existence is only one of the existences, and I must be doing God's work. Like the Crimson King and God's work must be the same, and therefore I'm doing good.
Right. Yeah. Whatever I'm doing must be God's will because I'm doing it is basically the thought process. I mean, I don't think this is even that uncommon in the real world. That's what makes it so interesting, because like it's such a contrast to so many of the bad guys we've come across. You know, he's not your Jack Moore, your Walter O'Dim, who are like kind of psychopaths. He's not your Mordred, who's a literal spider monster. He's not a Jonas, who's just sort of mercenary in his mentality, nor is he a Blaine, who's deranged in some specific way. He's just like this deluded guy who does sort of the normal thing of using convoluted justifications, in this case religious fantasies, but everyone has their own convoluted framework to justify doing the worst thing in the world, literally worst thing in the world. Like he's the guy most directly responsible for the worst thing out of any of the bad guys we've seen.
Yeah.
I mean, he's more responsible for it than the Man in Black, because this guy is actually making the breakers do the work.
Yeah.
So and he's the guy who just kind of has kind of a milquetoast story about how, you know, Jesus will forgive him and then everything will be fine.
Yeah. It's fascinating. And I think you're absolutely right that the King is kind of demonstrating the absolute power of this kind of thinking, that one person in the right position with this line of thinking can literally destroy the world. Right. I think that's such a fascinating exploration because, I mean, like on the one hand, a man of compassion. Like I love the sentence structure here. A man of compassion who is now on the verge of toppling the tower. He would quickly put Dinky and Stanley to death, and he also loves his mother and misses her. It's both are true. Both are true at the same time, and this is people. This is just how people are. You can like. We want to classify some of the worst people as monsters. We really want to, because it makes us feel better, right? It makes us feel better if the Pimli Prentesses of the world are just monsters that have abandoned their humanity, but usually just people that like can in the same breath tell God that the same God that other people worship for being an utmost good is totally wanting them to do this thing and hug their mother. Like,
yeah, I mean, like we were just talking about with Roland, this is a guy who I definitely don't love this guy, but it's hard to hate him so completely just because King has made sure to humanize him with a handful of specific touchstones where you're like, I mean, I can see myself in that. I don't like it. I don't like that I can see myself in that, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't. And that's so much more powerful, I think.
Sure. Here's a fun thought experiment for you. If you told Roland that in order to keep the beam up, you had to control a prison filled with psychic people who were constantly throwing psychic energy at the beam, not to rip it apart, but to keep it whole, and they had to be fed booster from children. Would Roland do that?
Probably. Yeah, I don't know. It's like I'm having trouble thinking of any reason why he wouldn't, other than he'd be like, no, I have to get to the tower.
Yeah, I mean that the honest answer to the question is like that solution doesn't involve Roland getting to journey to the tower, so he probably wouldn't do it. But
he'd put somebody else in charge. Yeah,
I mean that's the fascinating thing about this is that like what the characters are doing here is awful, and it's awful in this context because not only are they treating these people terribly, but they're treating these people terribly. Well, I mean, they're not treating them that terribly, but they're bringing about the end of the world.
Yeah.
Using these prisoners that they're disguising this prison as a paradise
Sure.
or a college campus or what have you.
Yeah, we're worth pointing out that also like Caliban Sturgis has been in, basically just constantly tortured for 1,000 years because of their actions. So
sure.
It's not like they're just being, good in any way.
Yeah. It's just fun to think, what if the shoe was on the other foot? Like,
sure.
What if this is what it took to keep existence going? Like,
yeah. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm too deep into this conversation that we're having, but I feel like this moment of showing that Roland is still so willing to just dispense with an innocent life if it's convenient for him, just in the previous chapter, and juxtaposing it with this guy really forms that connection. It really insists that you make that connection between the mentalities of these two characters.
Yeah, no, I think probably not as far as I just did it with my hypothetical, but certainly I think the text is inviting you to juxtapose them. Yes. I think that's fair. All right. So Finley and Pimli go on their rounds, and they bump into our friend Dinky Earnshaw, who's sitting around reading a book. The book is actually The Magus by John Fowles. And Finley is all excited because he's reading another John Fowles book called The Collector, and he wants to have a chat with Dinky, to have a little palaver book club about the author and the two novels and how they relate and how they're different. But well, here's what happened. Still wearing that politely expressionless expression, Dinky Earnshaw said, "Perhaps later you could take your copy of The Collector, hardcover I hope, and stick it up your furry ass." Sideways. Finley's hopeful smile disappeared. He gave a small but perfectly correct bow. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Cy."
So tell me this didn't make you feel just a little bit bad for Finley for a second.
I mean, a little bit. Like, I love the part like a couple minutes later where he like pats himself on the groin and says, like, just checking if my balls are still there.
Yeah. See, that's what I mean. Okay. This is what I mean. Like the book is showing Finley and Pimli just being delightful, right? Like, like they're monsters, but, you kind of feel bad for him. He just wanted to have a talk about a book, and this guy bit his head off, and then he makes a little self-deprecating witticism about it, and you're like, Finley, you rascal. And it's like, isn't this interesting that King he really is trying to make us feel a little bit sympathetic for these guys who are absolutely on the other side of our heroes in every possible way.
It's just a couple of working class dudes going about their job, right?
Yeah.
but I mean, that's the hilarious contradiction of this place, because they are in a prison whose stated goal is to end the world. Mm-hmm. And he's like, "Oh, let's have a fucking great chat about these two books we're reading."
Yeah.
It's so ironic that we're both reading a book by the same author. Yeah. I'd love to have a conversation with you about this. And Dinky, who is one of the three characters that, at least that we know of so far, that has woken up to the horrors of what is going on here, is just like, fuck you. Yeah. Like, you're the head of security and I'm your prisoner. Yeah. No, I don't want to have a relationship with you. I don't want to chat about books with you. Like, we're ending the world here. But because we are in their point of view, and because we see them as these two working class folk, we're just like, I feel a little bad.
Yeah, that was a little harsh there, wasn't it, Dinky? Yeah, no, isn't that's so great, right? It's so interesting. I mean, this is the thing that I think would happen a lot in the worm web serial that we covered, where the author would take on the perspective of some fucking monster of a character and just kind of show how they see the world, and by the end of it, you're like, oh yeah, I can kind of see how that would. And I think fiction has an amazing power to do that, and I'm always amazed to see it work so well.
Yeah. So the two continue to chat about Earnshaw, about the missing wolves, about their worries and paranoia as things get closer to D-Day. They've got irrational worries that they're trying to explain rationally. They're dealing with a bunch of powerful psychics, but they've got everything under control. They've got everything in line because, you see, Matt, telemetry, doesn't lie, ever, 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 ever. And then we get this part that I just had to focus on here. On the far wall was a picture of Niagara Falls. Some Cantoy guard had turned it upside down. The low man considered turning pictures upside down the absolute height of humor. Pimli had no idea why. But in the end, who gave a shit? I know how to do my fackin' job, he thought, rehanging Niagara Falls right side up. I know how to do that, and nothing else matters. Tell God and the man Jesus thank you. So check out Mr. Straightening Bad Pictures in Strange Hotel Rooms over here.
Oh my God. I freaked out. Yes, exactly. How interesting is this, right? Our like worst guy in the world is the kind of guy who straightens bad pictures. Somebody who just kind of automatically and compulsively fixes things that are out of order if he can, just like our protagonist. We're not reaching here. I mean, the text is very clearly connecting this character to Roland, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so what we're forced to kind of do is ask the why of that, right? Like our author has invited us to connect these two characters together, and we have to say why. And obviously, I think we've kind of already touched on that. It's because he's using characters like Pimli to poke at Roland, to poke at the worst parts of Roland, and to see what's there and what's left. And so, I mean, we're unfortunately at a point where we can't say definitively yet because we haven't seen the conclusion of the story of Pimli Prentess yet. But I think it's good to have in mind that once an author invites you to make this comparison, what happens to that character down the line in the story then matters, because it is also seen as a reflection of our protagonist. So we're kind of just going to have to put a pin in that for now.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, I feel like we're setting up for Roland to make some choices that we're not going to like him for making. That's my suspicion, like by comparing him to this guy and who this guy is and why this guy does what he does. That's why I think we're doing this right now. But yeah, you're right that we're going to need to see things unfold to understand.
Yeah. Come back to that in a bit. I love that as our two characters kind of reason with each other about this feeling they both keep having, they keep going back to this idea of rational versus irrational, right? And these are words that have kind of special charged meaning in the world of the Dark Tower, because Mia has invited us to specifically look at rationality and rational as part of the technological side of the world and the abandonment of magic, which is inherently irrational. So it kind of makes sense if you think about it that the agents of the Crimson King here at the end would be wrestling with irrational fears, that they have this so-called irrational fear of that something's not right here, something's going on, and they can't explain that rationally, but they don't know what to do with that. And I think the important part is that their fears are all right. Like they're right to feel this way. There is a gunslingers here. The Mad King's Dan Titty has come. And there are teleporters in Al Ghul Siento, right? Yeah. Like they have this line, abso-fucking-lutely no teleports, but they're wrong. So like it's the irrational tingling in the back of their mind that is correct and the rational part of them that is wrong. And I think that really is a great way of building this magic versus technology, rational versus irrational, kind of two sides war that's been going on in this story. I love it.
Yeah. And I mean, as we're going to see at the end of the chapter, he actually kind of decides to go with his gut rather than his reason. And that's so interesting.
So the two eventually enter the study, which is a fancy way of saying the place where the breakers hang out to attempt to end the world. I love this little interesting beat that the breakers, like when they go in there, they open a book or play with the dollhouse and it's all an illusion. They're not actually reading the book. They're not actually like, they're like psychically sending power up, but they like have to stand in front of this thing and pretend to occupy their mind with something. It's really interesting.
I love this image. It's such a cool visual image.
And then we find out that there's this balcony where our guards come hang out, and we see there was no rule expressly prohibiting staff from coming up here, and they all did it from time to time because it was refreshing. For one thing, being near working breakers made talk unnecessary. What they called good mind kicked in as you walked down the third floor hall on either side. from either elevator, and when you opened the doors giving on the balcony, good moon bloomed in your head, opening all sort of perceptual doorways. Aldous Huxley, Pimli had thought on more than one occasion, would have gone absolutely bonkers up here. Sometimes one found one heels leaving the floor as in a kind of half-assed float. The stuff in your pockets tended to rise and hang in the air. Formerly baffling situations seemed to resolve themselves the moment you turned your thoughts on them. If you've forgotten something, your 5 o'clock appointment or your brother-in-law's middle name, for instance, this was the place where you could remember. And even if you realized that what you'd forgotten was important, you were never distressed.
So fun. The concept of good mind is so fun. It's just yet another little thing that's just kind of like an extra fun, cool thing he's throwing into the mix here.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's inherently like good. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the feeling people got around the rose, right? Mm-hmm. We had this long, beautiful paragraph where King explained every coincidence going your way, every chance meeting being good, every it's a version of that, and I think it shows like this is a magical power that these people have, and so it's on the side of the magic side versus the technology side, and I love it.
Yeah, it does have a feeling of the white that's interesting, and which forces you to say like, okay, so does that imply that the breakers are channeling the white, that the touch, the shining comes from the white, and that is why they're able to destroy the beam, is that they're using this pure good power to destroy, and you need the good, you need the white to break the beams. That's kind of an interesting thought there. I don't.
Yeah.
Another just transient thing popped in my head. You did point out just now that the thing about the white is that every coincidence turns out in your favor and so forth. It's like, well, that's bad storytelling. It would be very boring to read a story where everything just went well for everyone all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So the white in Ka are intention in this way, because if the white had its way, it would be a very boring story. No one would read it.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, that's why Ka isn't just the domain of the white.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
I also love this little beat about how the Mona Lisa in the Louvre is fake and the real one is here in Algol Ciento. It's just this perfect little beat. I know that's like a conspiracy theory that the Louvre Mona Lisa is fake, and King is like, yes, that's correct, and it's here.
Yep, it's in this room where people are ending the world, right?
Yep.
That's great. I love it.
So then we see that our pal Ted walks into the study, and we learn that he's actually kind of a battery, a power up, right? He enhances the power of everyone around him, which goes like, I love how you were talking earlier about like Ted has kind of wised up to how bad they're doing and is actively working to stop it, but like how much of the success of this project has been because he's boosting the breakers around him, and how long has he been doing that for?
Yeah, really definitely. Yeah, he seems very special in the scheme of things, and yeah, I mean, he's been complicit in a sense, right? I mean, it's possible he didn't realize what he was doing. We don't really know that, but yeah, he I agree. It's a very interesting question.
Yeah, we skipped right over it, but I love the part where these three like asked Roland and them where the power ups they were getting were coming from. Basically, the children of the Kala, and like they were afraid to ask because they like kind of knew, but it's a different story to be told it specifically. And the Katet was like, "Nah, you don't want it. You don't want it. It's not going to help if you know."
Yeah. Yeah, which is basically telling him, right? But he's,
yes.
Yeah.
So we end our chapter here as Pimli heads back to go to sleep, and he's thinking about, and just suppose now, someone was actually channeling that feeling, sending it up to them like a lullaby. Go to sleep, Pimli. Go to sleep, Finley. Go to sleep, all of you good children. Ridiculous idea. Totally paranoid.
I mean, it's great because, God, he's put us in this fun position, right, where we want him to fail, obviously, but at the same time, you're sort of grinning because you're like, he's onto them, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
King has done this weird thing where he's made us. I'm not rooting for them at all, but I'm definitely interested in like what's going to happen with them. Like I hope I have a feeling we're going to get into a big gunfight soon. I don't know where this feeling is coming from. That was a joke.
Could it be?
Yeah,
could be the cache of guns.
Yeah, right.
Sitting in the mountain.
But like I really hope that when we do that, we see what that's like from both sides of the fight. Because I'm just like interested to see what happens to these characters now. I'm really invested in them.
Sure. Yeah. And now we get to the end of the chapter here. And I just wanted to read this part because this is what made me really feel like this is just a short story about a prison warden named Pimli Prentess. Pimli got out of bed, a tall man with a hairy slab of gut, now wearing blue pajama pants and nothing else. He pissed, then knelt in front of the toilet's lower lid, folded his hands, and prayed until he felt sleepy. He prayed to do his duty. He prayed to see trouble before trouble saw him. He prayed for his ma, just as Jim Jones had prayed for his as he watched the line move towards the tub of poisoned Kool-Aid. He prayed until the thunder had died to little more than a senile mutter, then went back to bed, calm again. His last thought before drifting off was about tripling the guard the first thing in the morning, and that was the first thing he thought of when he had woke to a room awash in artificial sunlight, because you had to take care of eggs when you were almost home.
I love the implication that like it was prayer to God that caused him to decide to triple the guard, which is obviously going to be bad for our heroes.
Yeah. But then, I mean, King makes the Jim Jones connection specific here, which is, I mean, it's so funny the way the narrator interjects in these stories, right? Because the Jim Jones comparison was brought about by a character named Dickie in another chapter. And then the narrator is bringing that comparison back here as it's describing Pimli Prentess, a tall man with a hairy slab of gut who's praying to God in front of the toilet, which is just the perfect imagery ever. Praying to God in front of the place where you take a shit is perfect. He convinces himself here that he's got to triple the guard. So that's not going to be good. And so we've kind of like these first two chapters, we've kind of defined our sides and of course we know which side we want to win, but it's just this wonderful little story. And what makes it seem short story-y to me is that this is kind of the end here is kind of similar to the way it began. Like we started with this description of Pimli Prentess, and we end on this re-description of Pimli Prentess. A tall man with a hairy slab of gut is like the way he was described in the opening of the chapter, and so we've come full circle here. I don't know. I just loved it.
Yeah, no, it does feel like a short story, very self-contained. It's great.
All right, let's move on to the sad chapter now, Matt. We have to get to chapter 7, Ka-shume. And the chapter opens with this description here, and we're not even sure what to make of it yet, but we open with this. A feeling both blue and strange crept among the gunslingers after Brodigan and his friends left, but at first, no one spoke of it. Each of them thought that melancholy belonged to him or her alone. Roland, who might have been expected to know the feeling for what it was, Ka-shume, Court would have called it, ascribed it instead to the worries about the following day, and even more to the debilitating atmosphere of Thunderclap, where day was dim and night was as dark as blindness. I love how King does this, Matt. It's actually quite clever. He introduces us to this concept before he defines it. So we're told there's this melancholy called Ka-shume. We know it's some sad feeling, and we know it's important and Ka related because it's right in the word, but nobody recognizes it yet. Not even Roland.
Yeah, I think so. I had a fun thought here that I think we're sort of tracking with like the narratively induced feeling of ominousness, like all the death flags as we call it. So like I think yet again King is saying like, okay, so like, you know how I'm creating this sense of dread in you, the reader? Well, the characters are also feeling that same sense of dread, but it's a magical fourth wall breaking thing called Ka-shume. We're even using the word Ka, which is almost like at this point like a tag meaning like meta. As like a manifestation of this like narrative concept in the story.
Yes, Ka-shume is roughly translated to meta sad.
Yeah. Sad. Yeah, I mean, I think you said this when you were chatting about this earlier. It's sad that the book is almost over.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, because I mean that is a truth of reading the story is you're holding the book in your hand. You know how long it is, and you know that every page you turn gets you closer to the end, and we know that this is the end.
Mhm.
Like anyone reading this book knows that this is the last book of this journey. And so there is a melancholy that everyone feels as they approach the end of a book, as they know that they're going to be leaving, whether the characters live or die, the characters are going to cease to exist when we close the book. They're not going to go on any more adventures. The adventures will be over whether they survive the book or not. And there's this feeling of sadness there. And that is Ka-shume.
Yeah.
And of course, King takes that and literalizes it and makes his characters feel it as well.
I love it.
Yeah. So the quartet begins to rummage around the cave, and they notice all kinds of goodies. There's some recorded tapes that Ted left for him that they'll listen to. They don't quite get to it in this chapter, but they're talking about they're going to listen to him, and a whole bunch of other cool stuff. But Jake, ever the empath, can't let go of the feeling he has. He says he's only felt it once before, right before Roland let him fall,
Mhm.
which is ominous.
Yeah, that's the moment I was talking about, where we're reminded, like, King's taking this opportunity to remind us, hey, this dude did bad stuff.
Yep.
And this specific feeling, not just of the Tet might be broken, but the Tet might be broken because of something Roland does, I think is maybe at least being gestured at here.
Okay. And then we see that Susanna gets a new present here, Matt, a kind of motorized tricycle thing. And we know it's hers because on it is a card, the Lady of Shadows, almost as if to say, what is being drawn is like what was drawn is now being undrawn.
Mm-hmm.
And in this moment, Roland realizes what he's feeling. And now he recognized the feeling that had crept among them for what it almost certainly was, not worry or wariness, but Ka-shume. There was no real translation for the rue-laden term, but it meant to sense an approaching break of one's quartet. Walter O'Dim, his old nemesis, was dead. Roland had known it as soon as he saw the face of the Lady of Shadows. Soon one of his own would die as well, probably in the coming battle to break the power of Devartoy. And once again the scales, which had temporarily tilted in their favor, would balance. It never once crossed Roland's mind that the one to die might be him.
Oh, man. So much here, right?
Yeah.
First of all, I wish I'd kept better track of all the moments when Roland just knows something, like how he knows Walter is dead here.
And let's inspect that for a little bit here, because he knows it because he sees the card that Walter showed him way back in the Gunslinger.
Yeah.
And this card is to him like he's seeing it again means a circle is being completed in some ways. Like, you're leaving the story.
Right. And you have to wonder, like, I mean, did Ted put the card here? Does he know? Like,
who put that card there? Yeah.
I mean, it could just be, literally Deus Ex Machina, but it could just be, that Ted felt compelled to do it. Who knows? Whatever. It's not that important. It's a cool image regardless. Yeah. So that's interesting. I think it's interesting how King is setting up the situation, because I feel like anybody could die here. I mean, so like you're almost sure that either Eddie or Roland will be the one to die, because death came between them line kind of told us, like, okay, one of them is going to die. It could very well be Roland. Like, that would be really interesting, right? Because I think I love that line, right?
Yeah. It never once crossed Roland's mind that the one to die might be him, which is just him saying, I'm the protagonist.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean, like, the line could be a cheeky, like, he didn't think it was going to be him, but actually it was. Or it could just be like, of course it's not going to be Roland.
Right.
He would never think it's going to be Roland because he's the guy.
Right. He's the guy. And the thing about this story is that you can die and then still do things. So
sure,
even if he does die, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of his story. In fact, I have suspicions that, like, various characters might, like, various things that happened earlier in the story might be due to, like, time traveling ghosts of the characters who die in the future. But
wow, okay.
Because I mean, we basically already
pick at that.
What?
Can we pick at that for a little bit? I want you to go further into that.
I mean, so, like, we sort of saw this thing happen. Not sort of. We saw this thing happen where we saw Callahan and Jake, very mysteriously intervened upon by the voice of Roland speaking out of Callahan's mouth. What the hell is going on? Okay, we learned almost immediately after that it was like this magical Ka wave from the beam that astrally projected them into that moment, and then astrally projected them into the other moment with Susan. And that was literally time travel. That was them like casting their consciousness forward and across universes, right? And then back. And there's other things in the story where we've had like voices in people's heads that tell them to do things or not do things, mysterious feelings of deja vu that really were never quite addressed, other than just being like, oh, you're a gunslinger, so of course you would feel that way. It's like, well, maybe. And so the idea that if some character were to die and then be able to be kind of a floating viewpoint who can sort of psychically touch people at important moments back in time in the story, that would answer a lot of those questions, that would like resolve some of those little niggling question marks that I had from earlier points in the story.
Okay.
And this could be just complete insanity. This could be some readers some listeners will recognize this as Byron's chocolate. Most will not, and I apologize for that.
Byron's chocolate, for those that don't know, is our doof glossary terms of things we make up as we talk about stories, is when Matt just goes fucking buck wild on one little piece of information.
Yes.
I think this theory you have, and I'm not confirming nor denying it, but this theory you have, I think you have a lot more evidence for it than you did for the Byron's chocolate situation.
Yeah.
So I don't want to label it that. I think that's dismissing, obviously, the thinking, the huge amount of thinking you've done on this. So I think that's cool.
Cool. All right. Good.
Awesome. All right. So yeah. So I guess the question I need to ask you here is, we're being told rather specifically in the sentence that at least Roland is like, okay, one of my Ka-tet's going to die, specifically because my enemy has died. The scales need to be balanced. Ka needs the scales balanced because the story would get boring if the good guys just outnumbered the bad guys. So we need to remove one of my people from the board as well. So Matt, if someone's going to die, who's it going to be?
So yeah, I think it might be more than one person.
Okay.
I mean, Susanna's death is very heavily telegraphed here because it's Susanna's card, right? We've also been told, we've basically been told either Eddie or Roland will die. So I still think it might be both Susanna and Eddie. I'm most sure that it will not be Jake. And I mean, Oy could very well die too. I just don't think that I don't think they would necessarily feel full on Ka-shume if it was going to be Oy. Sorry, Oy.
Poor Oy. He's part of the Ka-tet, man. He gets to drink and tell Roland he loves him.
He does get to drink and tell Roland he loves him. I mean, that's true. I think, I mean, that's the thing is like, I think I predicted a while back that Susanna, Eddie, and Oy were going to die. So maybe that all happens now. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, if you're asking for a prediction, I'll just say that, and then
okay.
I wouldn't like that, but oh no, I mean, let me rephrase. I could very well think that was the most heartbreaking scene in fiction, and like it in that sense, but I don't. Like, that doesn't mean I want it to happen.
Sure.
So yeah.
All right. I guess we'll find out.
I guess so.
So it is perhaps the greatest irony in the world that the Ka-shume settles in right as the Ka-tet is gifted some of the most extensive arsenal that they've ever had. Uh-huh. They have AR-15s, they have rocket launchers, they have nukes, possibly something that has radiation.
Great.
We see that they get sneeches as well that'll kick the Slytherin out of you. It says on the tin, which is just hilarious. It's just a hell of a lot of goodies here, Matt. Enough for an entire army. We see here.
It's so great. Yeah, King knows how to get us excited, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. And so we then next see the Ka-tet look over a map that Ted provided to them as they start to formulate their plan. And I included a copy of the map here in our notes, Matt, because I know you're listening, so you can't see the pictures that King has put in the book. True. So here's the Devar toy. You can kind of see all the different places, and everyone reading along knows what this looks like as well. My favorite thing is also Jake's favorite thing, which is the question mark next to the north on the
the compass with no east or west in a north and a south question mark. Yeah, it's great.
North, yeah. It's really great. I think this just helps us. Like, we've talked about how I, as a reader, am not good at visualizing things naturally. Like, I read with emotion, and I'm not actually like acting out the scene as it's occurring as if like people are in geographical space fighting each other. It's just not the way I read books. But I am able to do that a little bit more when visual aids are provided. So I feel like this just helps us visualize what Blue Heaven looks like a little more.
Sure.
And we can see exactly where the watchtowers are. We can see where Damley House is, which is where the study is. And we can see where the warden's house is. And we kind of see this whole thing just lined up for us.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, it fits so well with kind of your image of like, it's little college towns, little quaint little town. So yeah,
little college town surrounded by walls and with 3 sets of wires on one side,
and guard towers, and yeah.
So Roland seems like very, very interested in what the Damley house is made out of. Is it wood? Yeah, they all kind of think it's made of wood.
So I guess they're going to burn it. I don't know what else to do with that other than like they probably want to burn it down. Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. That's all I got.
Sure. I mean, we know it's part of their plan formulating. So it is interesting. The things that King tells us and the things that King doesn't. And Roland is formulating a plan here. We don't really see what the extent of the plan is. That's held back from us.
True. Yeah.
But we know that there's a plan, and it involves Damley House being made of wood.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we have to mention is that all during this, we keep like hearing the cries of some desert dog that's freaking our Ka-tet out. And at one point, Roland just says, "Can toy Teddy?" And Jake asks, "Is that like Don Teddy?" Which is the little prince, which is Mordred. And that's perfect because it actually is Mordred. Like the thing crying out in pain is Mordred out there hunting and killing stuff.
Yeah.
So Roland's just saying this phrase, and Jake asks a question, and Roland just ignores him. But yeah, you were spot on there, Jake.
Which is I like Cantoy TD because if we're just using our midworld speak that we've guessed at, it's basically little devil, right?
Yeah.
Little demon, little devil, which is I like that. And it's also so chilling when we later realize what happened to the dog. It really kind of makes this moment pop back in your mind. It's great.
Yeah, definitely. So the Ka-tet get ready to listen to some of the recordings that Ted left for them. But before they do that, Roland takes a bottle of this wonderful water and asks his Ka-tet to, quote, "drink, bondsman, and drink, bondswoman." And he goes through this ritual with them. And this is one of those moments in the show where we're just going to go through the quotes of each individual person's reaction to this ritual and then talk about them a little bit. I think that's the only thing to do here in this beautiful and tragic moment. So we start with Eddie, which makes sense because Eddie is the first one drawn. And actually, technically, we go in the order of drawing, right? It's Eddie first, then Susanna, then Jake, and then Oy. And so none of them really understands what's going on first, but Eddie understands left. And Roland says, "I love you." And Eddie says, "Why?" "I love you too." Eddie said. It was surprised out of him. "What's wrong? And don't tell me it's nothing, because I feel it." "Nothing's wrong," Roland said, smiling. But Jake had never heard the gunslinger sound so sad. It terrified him. "It's only Ka-shume, and it comes to every Ka-tet that ever was. But now, while we are whole, we share our water. We share our kef. 'Tis a jolly thing to do."
Yeah, the idea of Roland being so sad is heartbreaking. I love how Eddie doesn't like being called bondsman. That's in there. Like, it reminds me of how I wasn't really comfortable with the Ka-tet suddenly adopting the structure where Roland was the din. Back when that happened, I was like, no, I liked it when they were just like a band and they're all kind of on the same level. But
and I think from the beginning, Eddie was always kind of more resistant to to Roland's like commands and forcing him to do these things than the others were. So that kind of makes sense for Eddie as well.
Yeah.
So then Roland turns to Susanna and we get, "Yes, Roland, I call you Din." She looked very pale, but perhaps it was only the white light from the gas lanterns. "Will you share kef with me and drink this water?" "With pleasure," she said, and took the plastic cup. "Drink, bondswoman." She drank, her grave dark eyes never leaving his. She thought of the voices she'd heard in her dream of the Oxford jail cell. This one dead, that one dead, t'other one dead. Oh, Discordia, and the shadow grows deeper. Roland kissed her mouth. "I love you, Susanna." So Susanna's summoned back to the thing that she still hasn't told them, right? Like this is, remember, she'd never told them about the death of Stephen King. And she still doesn't tell them here, but all she can think of is Discordia here. Like this is tragic and awful. And I love she looked very pale, but perhaps it was only the white light from the gas lanterns. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
No. Yeah.
I think she feels the ominousness of what is coming, right? Like I mean they all do, but what I'm saying is I think she knows she's going to die. That's what I'm saying. Okay.
Well, it's like remember they're like Eddie here. Eddie doesn't understand what's going on. It was surprised out of him. Susanna, on the other hand, can see. That's been her quote unquote power. And so she can kind of see what's happening here. And then we get to Jake and Jake can feel it. Right.
I like that. I like it a lot.
"Yes," Jake said. There was no question about his pallor. Even his lips were ashy. "Ka-shume means death, doesn't it? Which one of us will it be?" "I know not," Roland said, "and the shadow may yet lift from us, for the wheel's still in spin. Did you not feel Ka-shume when you and Callahan went into the place of the vampires?" "Yes." "Ka-shume for both?" "Yes. Yet here you are. Our quartet is strong and has survived many dangers. It may survive this one too. But I feel..." "Yes," Roland said. His voice was kind, but that awful look was in his eyes, the look that was beyond mere sadness, the look that said this would be whatever it was, but the tower was beyond, the dark tower was beyond, and it was there that he dwelt, heart and soul, Ka and Kef. "Yes, I feel it too. So do we all, which is why we take water, which is to say fellowship, one with the other. Will you share Kef with me and share this water?"
Yeah.
So even in this moment, Jake looks at him and knows that it's not going to be Roland. He's
not, again, reemphasizing he's sad, but his mind is always at least partly on the tower and not on his friends who are about to die. Even now, the awful look in his, the look isn't awful because he's sad. The look is awful because he's not as sad as he should be, in a sense.
Yeah. Because it is there where he dwelt, heart and soul, Ka and Kef, right? He's sharing Kef with them right now, but his Kef, his true Kef, is with the tower. It always will be. It always was. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's awful.
And then, through our people, Roland has kissed each one of them. But then, before Roland could kiss him, he dropped the cups, flung his arms about the gunslinger's neck, and whispered fiercely into his ear, "Roland, I love you." So Jake doesn't wait for Roland to do it. He does it first. And because he understands, because he knows. Ugh. "We are quartet," Roland said. "We are one from many. We have shared our water as we have shared our lives and our quest. If one should fail, that one will not be lost, for we are one and will not forget, even in death." They held hands a moment longer. Roland was the first to let go.
It's interesting because the first time, like when I listened through this in the audiobook, I was just sort of cognizant of the beauty and the closeness and the power and the goodness of it. But like doing a close reading here, it really is a lot darker, right? I mean, well, you don't know what my brain was doing, but it seems a lot darker now because, we're focusing so much on how Roland is he's sort of thinking about his fix even while he's going through this. And he's the first to let go. He's the first to drop their hands. It's sad.
I mean, what he's doing is he's saying goodbye to them, basically. Like, this is the last time we're all going to be together. So farewell. I will be moving on, right? That was the thing that he felt from the beginning, which is Roland never thought that he would be the one.
Mhm.
I know I will be moving on. I will be going on. You will be leaving. You will be one of you will be left behind, at least.
Yeah. I think this idea that he asks Jake, like, did you feel Ka-shume for both of you? And he said, and Jake says yes, kind of implies that Roland doesn't feel Ka-shume for himself. Like, he knows that's that's not in the cards.
And the tragedy of the fact that he is telling each and every one of these people, even little Oi, that he loves them, and he does, right? Like that is not a lie. He loves them.
Mm-hmm.
He just loves the tower more.
Yeah. I mean, it comes across as cold comfort, actually, when he says, like, if one of us should fall, they won't be lost because we'll not forget. And it's like, okay, so you're gonna recite their name from the parapets of the tower, like in the poem, but that's not that's cold comfort, man. That's not. I'm gonna be dead.
Yeah, and I mean, if Ka-shume is the breaking of the Ka-tet, right? The statement "for we are one" is not going to be true anymore.
Uh-huh.
We are one from many. Ka-tet means one from many, right?
Uh-huh.
And if the Ka-tet is broken, then that's not true anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's true now. It's true until whoever falls, but
reminds me of Callahan asking him, like, what do you fear most? And he says the breaking of the Tet, and Callahan's like, oh, the breaking of the Tet, not like the death of one of your friends, but the breaking of the Tet. It's the way he thinks about this.
But I mean, it reminds me so much of when Roland and Jake went in the mountain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where he immediately, like, he feels this emotion, and he's like, okay, this is it. It's happening. And he pushes them away. He's the first to let go. Yeah. He has their one final moment, and it is beautiful. It's beautifully written. It's beautiful in that just seeing these characters look at each other and say, I love you. And they mean it. They all mean it, even Roland. But then he's the first to let go. So we've done that. And now we wait for the breaking of our Ka-tet.
Yeah. It's the decoupling. I still love that word.
Yeah.
That it's haunting.
It is quite literally the decoupling because he lets go of their hands.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So the ritual finished, we leave the Ka-tet behind and go hang out with Mordred again. And as we said before, it was him out there in the wilderness causing the lambs to scream, the coyotes. And he's been listening in. He knows what Roland is planning, and Mordred is going to let it happen, Matt.
Yeah.
We see here he says he could stop it, true, but Mordred feels no interest in his Red Father's plans or ambitions. What he most truly enjoys, he's discovering, is the bitter loneliness of outside, of watching with the cold interest of a child watching life and death and war and peace through the glass wall of the ant farm on his bureau.
This is such a... Mordred is turning into such a interesting character, like,
right?
Like so much more like depth and novel. Like, I don't think I've seen a character quite like this. I was going to say villain, and I was like, no, he's not. Like, he hasn't done anything bad yet. Mordred has done nothing bad yet. He killed Walter O'Dim, and he killed a Billy Bumbler. Okay,
unforgivable.
Yeah, but no, it's so God. I love this little, speaking of little short stories, little Mordred section is so beautiful and fun and interesting.
Yeah, I also like to think about, like, obviously Mordred is a combination of his Red Father and his White Father, as he calls him. You wonder this outsider nature, like this lonely outside of the campfire nature of him. Where does that come from?
Yeah,
because I think there's a little bit of Roland in that, right? Like, Roland is part of this Ka-tet, he's part of this group, but he's always told them that their Kef is stronger than his because before it was because they came from this other world. We're not even sure they come from the same world. The point is that they are closer with each other than he is with them because his Ka and Kef, as he says right here, is always with the tower. So he is and always has been a little bit apart from this group, and so much of his life was him alone, like chasing after the Man in Black, this bitter, lonely outside life. So you could argue that some of who Mordred is here comes from that father.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right there. I love it.
All right.
I love this whole section.
The end. Yeah. Man, some really great chapters here. I love this book, and I like the big events of the book are the ones that stick in your head. And so it's been a joy revisiting these chapters, and falling in love with these little moments that you might not remember after you finish reading everything.
Yeah. There's just so much delight crammed into this section that I had to, I mean, I love every week of reading. I love this series, but I just have to say, like, there's so much. God, I don't know. The word interesting feels so emotionally neutral, but just like there's so much to think about here, right? There's so many moments where you're like, whoa, you know.
I love that the book is challenging you, because like I don't want to hate Roland. I don't want to read the section where he looks sad because he's already thinking about the tower, approaching the tower away from his quartet. But also it's there. Like, I don't want to compare him to Pimli Prentess. That guy sucks. I hate him.
Yeah.
But also I have to, because the book is making me. And and it's just this push and pull, this struggle. I love Roland. He's one of my favorite characters and I love him. But sometimes I fucking hate him.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right. Well, that is it for this week. We will find out what happens. Maybe we'll find out the plans. Maybe we'll see how Mordred is going to be involved. Maybe we'll see the showdown. I don't know. We'll find out next week. Next week, it's our Christmas episode, Matt. I think our episode's going to come out on Christmas Eve. So for your present, we're going to cover chapters 8, 9, and 10 of part 2, Blue Heaven. So Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yeah, Merry Christmas. Please download it.
Yes. Well, it'll be Christmas Eve morning, right?
Okay.
They won't be. That's a perfect thing to do on Christmas Eve morning.
Absolutely.
All right, Matt, let's move into our discussion question real quick. Our discussion question from last week was, what is your favorite Deus Ex Machina and why is it actually good?
And from Man of Zimmer, we have, my favorite use of Deus Ex Machina comes from Fringe. That's right, Fringe. You need to get on it. Minor spoiler warning, the Observer September is a great example of God in the Machine. He is only supposed to watch, only supposed to observe, but instead he makes a choice to intervene at a crucial point in time to save our hero's life. This sets into motion a butterfly effect ripple across time and the multiverse that plays out over the series. Chaos ensues. But an even better use of Deus Ex Machina comes from the real-life actual fans of Fringe. When Fox was considering canceling the show before the story was finished, the fans organized and saved the show's life. This was during the time of DVRs and before the days of online streaming services. Netflix was still mailing out DVDs. The show aired on Friday night, aka the Friday night death slot, where shows go to get canceled. And so the majority of viewers recorded the show to their DVR and watched it later. But the network was using an old system of Nielsen ratings, which only counted live broadcast viewings. So what did the fans do? They organized online and developed a new system to communicate to the network that they were watching. They started discussing the show over Twitter using hashtags. Fox noticed. The show was saved, and they added in episode-specific hashtags at the beginning of each episode so that the community engagement could be tracked. That's right. Fringe started live tweeting. Look it up. The fans of Fringe reached down from the heaven of corporate network Nielsen ratings to save the life of a worthy sci-fi show destined for cancellation. The show continued and made it to 100 episodes, ensuring a satisfying conclusion to the story and, more importantly, syndication. Now go watch it.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Well, I'll get right on that. I got to finish moving first.
That's a fun story. So often you hear,
that's really cool. Yeah. I like that.
So often you hear the version where the show just gets canceled and everybody's sad forever.
Yeah. All right. Next we have Pear Jane, who says, I'm going with the Lost Boys. Grandpa was never framed as anything but crazy old TV-free taxidermist, but he had his ride tricked out like a 1980s Van Helsing ought to and blasted through the wall of his own damaged house to kill the bad guys. Grandpa Ex Machina. Matt, you still haven't seen that movie?
Still haven't. It's a totally baffling and inscrutable series of words there, Pear Jane, but thank you. Appreciate your answer. Yeah, no, I don't know what any of that is. All right. Dark Gazing said, my favorite example of this trope is the wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey Deus Ex Machina, where initially it looks like the gang are saved by divine intervention, but it is later revealed that it was actually them who saved themselves because they did time travel. Who threw the stone at Hermione that got the gang to leave Hagrid's hut? Well, it was actually Hermione. But at the time, we thought it was God or fate or Ka like a fucking wind. Often we know that after the events of the story, some character has to go off to the right place and time to ensure the timeline, like Bill and Ted with Ted's dad's car keys. But we don't get to see that, which makes it feel more like a Deus Ex Machina because the gang just say they'll go do it and it's instantly done. Better send the T-800 back when I've finished writing this comment, though, or John Connor is screwed.
That was fun.
Yes, that is fun.
I love, the Deus Ex Machina where it's actually just you is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's always a fun surprise. Yeah, I agree.
Fast Randall says, my favorite instance of Deus Ex Machina is from a childhood favorite book of mine, The 13 and a Half Lives of Captain Blue Bear. The book is batshit insane, and at one point in our story, our protagonist, Blue Bear, is saved from a deadly situation by an elderly pterodactyl literally named Deus Ex Machina. Mac, for short. I can't recommend this book enough if you love absurdist fantasy shenanigans. The moment happens around a third of the way through the story, and it only gets more bizarre as you progress through it.
That sounds fun.
Matt, you need to get this book and read it to your kids.
I know.
Stat.
Kind of reminds me of like Phantom Tollbooth. Is this related to that, I wonder? I don't know.
I don't know. No, I know. I actually have never read Phantom Tollbooth, but my wife, who is a teacher, would read it to her class every year, and she had a Phantom Tollbooth costume that she'd dress up in. And as a person who's not read it, that was wild to see her dressing up in Phantom Tollbooth costume and going to work.
Yeah, I remember finding it very confusing as a child, but maybe I was too young. Anyway.
All right, let's have the Phantom Tollbooth cast.
And that has nothing to do with the 13 and a half lives of Captain Blue Bear, but thanks for your comment. RL Raider says Animorphs. My favorite Deus Ex Machina involves a character / species of godlike Q-like entities. When our heroes are first looking for the location of a MacGuffin, they end up on the brink of death, and this entity appears, stops time, and offers them an out. Abandon Earth and live in a space zoo as the last remnants of humanity. They get brought to the future and shown how they're doomed to lose their war, complete with an evil version of our POV character and a Palantir-like tower where the mall was. Future Rachel even set a trap for them since she already knew this was going to happen, though she didn't seem to expect a reckless attack from her past self. Ultimately, the group refuses the offer from this entity, but the entity got what it wanted. Number one, it conveniently appeared next to a door they didn't notice that they could use to escape their current predicament. Number two, it showed them where the Palantir MacGuffin was located in the future, where they could reasonably assume it was being built now. And number three, it showed them the future wasn't set in stone. The series, like The Dark Tower, also has a lot of allusions to the Lord of the Rings. For example, the name of the invading aliens is a homophone for the Elvish word for orc. If you ever have time, give the Animorphs series a read through. I know the Elvish word for orc.
What is it?
It's Irk.
Cool.
Yeah.
Matt is good at Elvish.
I can't let a moment like that pass and not.
Man, I read the Animorphs when it came out when I was a kid, but I never finished it, and I heard the end of that shit is wild, and I keep meaning to go do it, but like it's just a lot of effort to read like 80 kids books. I know it'll take like 3 hours per book, like if they're not very long and they're for kids, but it's just a lot of effort. But one day, maybe.
Yeah, there are a lot of them. It is fun how many answers related to Animorphs we get.
Yeah. Complicated 9519 says, I'd have to say my favorite Deus Ex Machina would also have to be my least favorite, and it's the shonen trope in anime that Matt mentioned. It's amazing and ridiculous at the same time. The main character gets a power up at the perfect timing, surpassing their limits, or the main group of characters don't die, which I love in One Piece, but it really ruined the end of a fairy tale for me. I enjoy the more subtle shonen trope where you know a character has been training for a while, and they don't show their true skills until the final moment where they are going to until they are getting a beatdown, which I still don't understand. They wait to the last minute, go all out and bust their ass right away. Pull all the stops, please. Or how an ally comes in at the last minute, saving the main character's life. Like, please, there are better ways than this. Borum does it too, though. A lot of superpower stories does all this, I suppose. Yeah,
I mean that's interesting. I think they're definitely. I'm thinking of particular shonen anime that is my guilty pleasure, where this happens like 6 times in a single episode, and it's actually fantastic. The Rescue Sasuke arc, everyone, it's so good. Anyway, Sorry, I'm sorry.
I don't know what a shonen
I'm so
anime
sorry.
is, and at this point, I'm too afraid to ask.
Um,
Don't tell me. I don't actually want to know.
it's
Don't.
it's
No.
But you know what the trope he's talking about, though.
Well, yeah.
I know what you mean. It's my favorite and least favorite as well. All right, Emperor Fry the Solid says to bring up Buffy, as we must. I suppose I'll say Bazooka. Should I read this? Is it going to spoil me? Specifically, how they got it. Xander, the Oi of the Buffy crew, gets a magical download of military information from a cursed costume. Everyone else forgets their costume curses immediately, but he gets to keep his because he needs something to do, and the writers need an excuse for some ridiculous stuff, like using a bazooka on an ancient evil demon. It's funny in that sharp Buffy way. It keeps the useless flopping character somewhat relevant. And who cares if it's a convenience? Everything is contrived. It's just a matter of what keeps the story going.
Exactly.
It's Ka, baby.
I let you read that one because, yes, it's a spoiler for things, but like you have no context for any of those things. So it's fine. It's totally fine. But we have another answer from Idolan Jones, who also lists a scene from Buffy, but that one is super spoilery. And I swear to God, I'm going to get you to watch Buffy someday. So I'm just not going to talk about it. But yes, Idolan, I agree with you. That is a pretty good example.
Okay, cool. Arroyo says, I generally don't like Deus Ex Machinas or any other form of unsubstantiated twist. It usually feels like lazy storytelling. And, well, when the twist is good, I just wouldn't call it a Deus Ex Machina in the first place. Usually my method for figuring out whether a twist is lazy or genius relies on the rewatch test, i.e., watch or read the work a second time and see whether this time around the twist makes sense throughout the movie. A good example would be Fight Club. The movie has a completely different yet consistent story the second time around. A bad example would be Now You See Me. Watching it a second time, you don't see any new clues or foreshadowing you might have missed the first time. And in fact, now that you know the ending, the movie isn't even consistent. The characters are acting out of character, even when alone, only for the benefit of the audience and the surprise.
Yeah, that movie sucks.
Yeah, I love the pastime of dragging that movie. Then they say,
especially its sequel.
Yeah, especially its sequel. Now you see me too.
Those bastards. Those bastards.
What the fuck? And then they say, but now I've done ranting. So to answer the question, one of the best Deus Ex Machinas has to be The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, specifically the way Arthur and Ford are rescued by the starship Heart of Gold after being thrown out into the void by the Vogons. I choose this scene because it is actually there as a form of satire on the use of the trope in books and movies. And even then, it actually does have an in-world plausible-ish explanation that the improbability drives whole propulsion method relies on generating improbable events. So it's both a criticism of the trope and an example of how to do it better, which is true.
Yeah. No, I that's a really good point. I mean, I think that is one strategy for exactly how to deal with this, is to make it a criticism of the trope.
Yeah, sort of lampshade the fact that you're doing that, right?
Yeah, because I think my favorite Deus Ex Machina actually comes from the film adaptation, where earlier in the story, a screenwriter guide specifically says, "So help me, if you end your screenplay with a Deus Ex Machina, you're a hack. Get out of here." And then the movie literally ends with a Deus Ex Machina alligator solving the plot. It's just wonderful.
Yeah. Also have to say that when you said the movie adaptation, my immediate question was, the movie adaptation of what? And then I remembered it's called adaptation.
The movie adaptation.
Which just tells you how meta this book is going to be, or this movie is going to be, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
ALH84001 says, I'll go with the episode of Lost aptly titled Deus Ex Machina, the 19th episode of season 1. It's a John Locke episode, the one where we meet his biological father, a con man who tricks him into donating one of his kidneys. One of the most heartbreaking moments in recent television history. While there's no clear God in the machine in the episode, one can definitively point to there is a lot of coincidence and plot contrivance that leads to Locke finding the crashed airplane in the jungle. John's mother also vehemently claims he was an immaculate conception, and the final image of this episode, with the distraught Locke crying and pleading at the hatch door, only to have a bright beaming light suddenly shine through the window, is evocative of a godlike power. Others will disagree. See what I did there? But there isn't much that can compete with Lost at its peak, a show that was admittedly very influenced by Stephen King. At one point, the Stoke creators even temporarily held the movie rights to develop The Dark Tower. Woe Discordia, what could have been? Yeah, I can't say this. I can't say which book of Stephen King's Lost is literally just, but like there is
a one.
There is a book that is just that Lost is just this book, and the writers, I even heard an interview with one of the writers were like, shit, someone's gonna notice that our show is literally just this book.
Why have I not heard this before? That seems really like a thing that would be a big meme, like Lost is ripped off from a Stephen King book.
I don't know. I feel like Lost is such an interesting show because it like was at just the early part of the online obsession with TV. And so plenty of people have definitely written about this. And it is possible you maybe heard it and it just went in one ear and out the other because you didn't really know Stephen King very much at the time. But yeah, Lost is just...
Huh. Fascinating. I can't wait to unravel this mystery.
I love Lost, and I agree. I agree that Lost at its peak is better than just about anything.
Yeah, sure.
So much disdain. Oh my gosh.
We'll just move on from that. R2D2 says, no, sorry, R2DT says, that really tripped me up there. Yeah. My favorite Deus Ex Machina moment is from Toy Story 3. At the end of the movie, our heroes are holding hands facing their inevitable death when the actual hand of God, the claw, comes out of the sky and saves them. This hand of God was set up in the very first Toy Story when the arcade claw crane game picks up an alien and he is promising his alien friends that he has been chosen to move on to a better place. As a literal example of this, I did not feel cheated in the moment or in rewatching many years later. Yeah, that's a great moment. And also it's not, see, I would say that's one of those great, like, actually set up, but in a way that you absolutely didn't notice because the green alien guys like conspicuously escape earlier in the movie.
Yeah.
And so they would totally be in a position to help there. So yeah,
absolutely, it's a very good one.
And then they say that they actually do hate the eagle Deus Ex Machina in Lord of the Rings, and that it did bother them that the eagles just didn't fly the ring straight to Isengard, or not. What did I say that to Mount Doom?
They couldn't.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
No, they couldn't.
They couldn't. Yeah, they couldn't.
If the eagle held the ring, the eagle would want the ring power.
Yeah.
And also there was a whole bunch of Nazgul. There's like actually a ton of in-universe reasons why this wouldn't actually work.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, like, they are eagles. Like they're somewhat smart, but they're not people. Like, I don't think you could just ask them to do it. I think they would just not do it. They'd just be like, nah.
They're just fucking around doing their own thing. Yeah. And like Gandalf asks them for help every once in a while. And if they feel like it, they're like, yeah, sure, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's basically it. Yeah.
Plus, on an actual thematic level, the whole point of the story is the power of humanity to overcome evil and all yada, yada, yada. Right. And it just wouldn't be a good story at all.
Yep.
All right, Steve D says, have to go with The Simpsons on this one. There were a bunch of episodes where Deus Ex Machina was a play, but the one that stands out, Homer got banned from Moe's Tavern for life. It happened in the first few minutes of the episode. The writers had to get Homer to another bar to get the rest of the story going. They went to the extreme to get him banned from Moe's. By the end of the episode, it was still not discussed or resolved. In future episodes, he was back at Moe's with no explanation. I remember being really frustrated as a kid, but looking back now, it's really funny and borderline genius. Hey, that's what you get for giving old Moe the old sugar me do. Interesting. I never thought of that as a Deus Ex Machina, but
yeah, I mean, any serialized or no, God, I always mix those up. Any episodic TV show where everything goes back to the way it was, even though something should have actually changed, that
is a Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah, it does pose a kind of like, wait, why are things back to normal now? That's funny. I never thought of it that way either. That's really good.
That's great.
God. Okay. Steve B says, my initial reaction was to try and choose between two of my favorite series, Harry Potter and Odd Thomas. It seems to me that the entire Chosen One subgenre, which includes Roland Deschain, Harry Potter, Odd Thomas, depends on technique. Otherwise, they wouldn't really be chosen, would they? In the end, though, another portion of your conversation led me down another unexpected path to the only series I love as much as, probably even more than The Dark Tower, Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. Until last week's Kingslingers episode and your discussion of Asimov's laws of robotics, I had not considered how much The Dark Tower parallels Foundation. Asimov and King are both prolific authors. These series both attempt to tie together dozens of the author's other works into a somewhat coherent, expanded universe, and I'm fairly sure that Flagg's thinking cap and Mordred's psychic abilities sound like they were lifted from Asimov's second Foundation, who are a manifestation of the Deus Ex Machina in that series. Cool. The answer goes on from here and goes into some more spoilery stuff about the Foundation saga.
I gotta read. We did the first Foundation book.
I read the second one. I read the second one on my own.
You cheater.
Didn't go further. But I've heard that there's some really great stuff in the later ones, especially that I just need to get to. So
yeah. Unfortunately, we have to put Steve B in timeout for bringing up a Dean Koontz book on a Stephen King podcast.
That's true.
Clearly against the Stephen King bylaws. Yeah. And you're in 15-minute timeout, Steve. Yeah. I'm sorry. Next, we have Crossland Shaw, who says, let's talk about a book you have read and discussed. One of my favorite moments of Deus Ex Machina comes from Recursion. Recursion has an incredibly intricate story in which the solution is actually really simple and in front of our face the whole time. Built around a series of recursive moments, we're told early on that the rules are one way, and the story follows them until they seem to break down in front of us. What could possibly make that possibility a reality? Why, maybe it was the fact that the antagonist was lying the entire time and that the rules were his own creation to keep himself in power and in charge of the control. While conventionally people would think of this as a twist, it has elements of a Deus Ex where it feels like it comes out of left field because we've assumed these made up rules to be our canons of probability. Yeah, that's a good point. I really enjoyed that book. I don't think you liked it as much as I did. I liked Recursion.
No, I liked it a lot. I think I felt like I think my comment was that I wish the second half had not taken the direction that it did, but I didn't not enjoy it. I just didn't want it to do that, but that's fine. No, I like that book a lot, and I know exactly what they're talking about because I think I remember we did a book club on this, we should say.
Yes.
We did a Doofcast book club episode on Recursion. We had a great time talking about it. I think we specifically talk about this thing that Crossland Shaw is talking about where I was just like, no, this breaks the rules. And you had to be like, no, Matt, it doesn't break the rules. It's because he was lying, which is exactly what they're saying here. So
yeah. Because the rules, I mean, it's one of those genius things where you have the rules are defined by the characters and the characters are being dishonest. So you think it's a breaking of the fundamental way the system works, but it's not because the system doesn't actually work that way.
Yeah.
Surprise.
But it can feel like a Deus Ex Machina. That's kind of how it felt to me, where I was like, what the hell, But no, it was there the whole time.
Yeah.
All right. Finally, Luke V says they picked a scene from Sanderson's Oathbringer. They're not going to put it here. Because
no, we're not going to put it here.
Oh, sorry, we're not going to put it here. We're not going to read it here.
Yeah, we're not going to read it.
Yeah, because we have covered the first book in that series. We're probably going to end up doing book clubs on more of the books in that series, and we don't want to spoil them for ourselves and others.
There's this thing that happens on our book club vote, which our patrons, patrons at any level on Patreon get to participate in picking which books we cover each month. And every time we put a Sanderson book on that list, it wins the vote immediately. It's never not happened that way. So we just kind of figure that we're eventually going to cover the rest of the Stormlight Archive. Because it seems inevitable.
Yeah.
So we're not going to spoil ourselves on that one. But I'm sure it's great, Luke. Sorry about that.
Yeah. This is a good time for us to mention that we do a monthly book club. This month we're reading a Sanderson book, actually.
Yeah, we're reading Warbreaker.
Warbreaker, yep. And we do it. We've done a lot of cool books. So you can, if you check out the Doofcast backlog for book club episodes, you'll see all the different books we've done.
I think we've been doing it for 3 years now. I think we have 36 books.
That's a lot of books.
It's a lot of books.
You're bound to find something interesting if you just go check the Doofcast feed.
We even did one Stephen King book. We did Carrie.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the second Stephen King book you had ever read at the time.
It's true. That's so weird, but it's true.
All right. Thank you, everyone that submitted questions. We had some other people that came in at the very last minute, but didn't have time to pull them into the script before we were recording. So sorry about that. Please keep sending in your questions. Or your answers, rather. We really, really love them. And please keep emailing us. As I said last week, I'm in the middle of moving. It's a crazy time, so I'm not responding to emails as promptly as I like to. But please, please, please keep sending them in, especially with the answer to this question, because I'm very much looking forward to the answers to this one. This one comes from Matt. This was a Matt question idea, and I really liked it. So the question this week is, what book gave you the greatest sense of Ka-shume? Yeah, I like it. I like it.
I'm looking forward to this because I tend to think of that feeling as being like an indicator that it was a really great book.
Yeah, totally. All right. We're finally done. That's it for us here this week. As we said earlier in the show, next week is Christmas, and we're not taking a break. We don't stop. We never stop. So we will be here on Christmas Eve with a new episode. Once again, we will be covering chapters 8, 9, and 10 of Part 2, Blue Heaven.
Yeah. Remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit r/doofmedia is the place to go to hang out and to answer the discussion question.
Mm-hmm. If you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so you make sure you never miss an episode. We're coming down to it. We've only got a few more episodes to the end, so you don't want to miss a single one of them. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else you can listen to podcasts.
That's right. And if you like our show and you want to support it, consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patrons, Doof Dancers, Tim W., Malia H., and Liam L., and new Doof Trooper, Traveler1234. Welcome. Thanks for joining. We hope you enjoy the cool benefits that we have at those levels.
Do you do the thing that I do where, like, every time I hear you read the names and say welcome, I imagine the Die Hard scene where Bruce Willis says welcome to the party, pal? Because that's what I think of every single time.
No.
Oh.
Now okay. I will, though.
Yeah, I was just kidding. I've never done that before.
Well, now it's in my head, though.
If you cannot afford to donate right now, that is absolutely okay. You're still part of our content. You're still with us, and we love having you here. There are tons of ways you folks can help us out. As we always say, you can share this podcast, and you guys have been sharing it. Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing new people into this journey with us. We rely on you guys to share it, so we really appreciate that. And of course, you can always help us out by leaving a rating and a review on this podcast. This week's Spotlight review comes from Joliette Jerry, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Great podcast, following the path of the beam. Just found this podcast, and as I'm on my first read-through, it's fantastic to listen for the extra details and more insight into King's great series." Thank you so much, Jerry. We really appreciate that. I love when I hear from new readers too, because I think, we've had so many people talk about our format, and I love that. I think our old readers specifically love it because they get to live vicariously through you. But it's always fun to hear new readers who are enjoying as reading along with us for the first time. So
yeah, that's really cool. I wonder what that experience is like. It must be different. Cool.
All right, folks, we'll see you right here next week on Christmas Eve as Operation Pop the Pimli begins.
Ew.
Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.